will do that. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as was advertised? I have a motion from Commissioner Farnsworth. A second from Commissioner Norfleet. Any questions on the agenda as it was advertised? Does public have any questions on the agenda as it was advertised? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. I'd like to invite Minister Sharon Cheeseborough to the podium, if you would, for our invocation before tonight's workshop. If you would, please rise and please remain standing at the end of the invocation for the Pledge of Allegiance. Welcome, Minister Cheeseborough.
Father God, we come before you in the name of Jesus, giving you the glory and honor, thanking you for this opportunity to work together. God, and grant this committee, this workshop, the wisdom, the understanding, the vision to make good decisions for the betterment of the city of Newberry, the citizens of Newberry, for the county, for the state. May the spirit of righteousness govern all that they do and agree upon. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Minister Cheeseborough. All right, our one item on the agenda is a wrap-up budget, unless tonight instigates the need for another one of the 2020 budget. Before we start, I'd like to notice the absence of Commissioner Martin. He couldn't get freed up from work, but he has confirmed that he will watch it later. And with that, Mr. Manager, get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, tonight is our fourth budget workshop. It is a wrap-up workshop, and the first one we kind of introduced the budget process and what our initial thoughts about budget were. Then we had a budget workshop specifically related to governmental forms, and then another one. The third budget workshop was dedicated to proprietary funds. I said forms, didn't I? Funds. I was so focused on the other. And tonight is a wrap up, potentially our last workshop, unless the commission has questions and wants us to have another one or another two. We'd be happy to have the more. We're going to go through information that hopefully you've all seen. There are, as always, there's a budget schedule, and that I guess we'll just kind of step right into that, and we'll talk about areas for consideration by the City Commission, get final feedback. We are planning our first hearing for adoption of a preliminary millage rate and adoption of a preliminary budget on September the 9th, which is a week from Monday, a week after the storm event has passed through. We'll have that first adoption hearing for all of our budgets, and then the second hearing will be on September the 23rd, second and final, potentially, where we'll adopt our final budget, and then we'll move on into October 1st in the new fiscal year. We'll start with a couple of accomplishments. These are the things that this board and the city have accomplished over the last couple of years, starting with building our general fund reserves to what we consider the minimum emergency amount of $1.6 million. We've diversified revenues. We continue to look for more ways to diversify revenues, understanding the importance of that. And this board, over the last 5 years, has been particularly focused on public safety and infrastructure, and we've seen a very, very keen focus on increasing funding to both of those areas and maybe belt tightening in other areas. More of your accomplishments, we have developed more equitable water and wastewater rates, so that, you know, from a small user fixed income perspective to a larger family with more discretionary income and more discretionary uses of water, there's more parity in our water and wastewater rates. We've developed the lowest utility rates, water and wastewater in particular, of our peer group. We have competitive electric rates Given our contractual costs for wholesale power, it's a stretch to say we're ever going to be the lowest in in electric rates, but we want to be competitive, and we have done that. We've reduced our cost, I believe, 14 or 15% over the last decade for power, and considering, cost of living, I think that's a significant achievement. We've seen a 25% reduction in solid waste rates over the last 5 years. Been a big commitment to funding for economic development, and always keeping costs to our residents in mind. The Commission has found a number of ways to save significant money through our law enforcement contract and our solid waste contract. So going into budgeting assumptions, this is the second time that you've seen these, but we make certain assumptions going in about our projected uses of utilities, what our population changes are going to be. We just got recent data from, is it Beaver that gives us that information? So last week or this week, we just found out that our growth rate from 18 to 19 was a little over 5%, 5 point something percent, where our population is estimated to be just over 6,500 people in Newberry. So we continue to see very vibrant growth. I would say that just reminds me that the 2020 census is occurring, and it is critical. A lot of our funding is tied to having very accurate census data, and so we can't urge enough, and the funding for the folks that are doing census taking is down, especially the marketing side. So I urge the Commission and residents of Newberry to take completing a census information very seriously and get that information turned in. It will be beneficial to our community the more comprehensive our data submission is. To get that covered. We do not propose any increases in electric rates. The Commission has asked us in the past to make incremental increases, CPI increases, or price index increases for water or wastewater. This year, we think that the water wastewater rate increases that we're proposing are less, significantly less than the price index suggests. We think we've got a good balance budget without that, and it's an opportunity not to raise our rates if we can hold the line. So we are proposing to hold the line with 1% increases in both water and wastewater. And the rest of the things are the things that, the allocation to general fund for administrative costs and the electric fund transfer. Electric fund transfer are all policies that have been adopted by the Commission some few years ago, and we've not received any direction to amend those. We do have a limit. We do have a focus on capital project. It is not the full-blown, not with no discretion for how much funding is available. We still look at our CIP, and we prioritize, and we make decisions on what we think we can afford for the amount of revenues that we collect. So under Commission considerations, this is the areas that we need feedback to finalize the budget. We think we've gotten most of it, but there are some decisions to be made to confirm. In particular, has to do with millage rate, and now that we know what we're going to do for law enforcement moving into fiscal year 2021, it gives us some clarity on what the Commission would like to do with millage rate in the proposed budget, which is fiscal year 2020. And there's a couple of other initiatives that has just come up since the last budget workshop that we're going to discuss tonight, and kind of get the Commission's feel for what they would like to see us do. So we'd mentioned law enforcement has now been decided, put to bed. Personnel expenses, we've gotten consistent feedback through all of our other workshops that we wanted to continue with an up to 4% merit increase program, so that's what we have programmed in. We have a fairly robust capital improvement program that consists of projects that are either renewal and replacement, which again, I'll always state that we prioritize renewal and replacement over expansion, because we just see that is the fundamental obligation of government, that when we get infrastructure that we need to maintain it in good condition, and that that an expansion is more of an embellishment, something that benefits future customers, but not necessarily existing ratepayers. And so we have those considerations for our CIP. Utility rate adjustments, we've gotten feedback from the commission previously, just want to confirm those. Our feedback on the fire assessment has been no change in fire assessment, and I think we adopted preliminarily we adopted finally the fire assessment at our last city commission meeting. So there's no change. We'll move into governmental funds, and I'll let Dallas take us through those.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Commissioners. In your governmental funds, your general fund mostly, we have a general fund budget of $7.3 million this year, with $7.3 million in revenues and $7.3 million in expenses. As always, being the government, most of your revenue comes from taxes, primarily property taxes, with some taxes, some other taxes that you impose, such as your communication service tax, fuel taxes, et cetera. And then your second largest areas of revenues come from your charges for services. It's going to be primarily recreation and solid waste fees, and then your special assessments and permits, building permits, fire assessment. And then a couple small areas, intergovernmental revenue, which comes from the state of Florida, makes about 10% of your revenue, which is what the manager was talking to earlier, where the census figures really come into play. In your expenditures, your largest expenditure category, as always, is public safety, which includes your fire department, your contract for law enforcement, your building department, and your code enforcement department. Public safety takes up about 37% of our general fund expenses, followed by your general government expenses, which are departments such as the city commission, city clerk, city manager, finance, HR, planning, facilities, just kind of the general citywide departments. And then followed by that by recreation and your streets and roads departments. And those are all the numbers of the pie charts I just gave you. That is our general fund budget, $7.3 million. We do have excess revenues over expenditures, a grand total of $2,700.
Knock yourself out.
Yeah, go crazy. This one's on you.
Okay, this one's on me, and that's, so Mr. Mayor, the budget that is before you, that the staff's recommended budget, and it uses a continuation budget with a millage rate of 5.999. At our last workshop and in the trim notice, we issued a millage rate cap that would not exceed 6.3623. Anticipating that if we went with a different law enforcement service, that we might have some unexpected costs. Dallas calculated that if we were to utilize a millage rate of 6.3623, it would generate about an additional $150,000 in general fund revenues that the commission would have discretion on how they would like to spend. So staff's not recommending that the commission adopt a millage rate of 6.36 or something between 6.36 and 5.99, but did want to, have a conversation, make that part of our workshop, that they have initially proposed 6.36, and that there are some additional unfunded programs that the commission might consider if they wanted to be something above 5.999, which is where the continuation budget is currently set. And with a reminder also that our law enforcement contract this year is a 3 to 3.5% increase above previous years, and so we were able to have a continuation millage rate and fund it. The law enforcement costs for fiscal year 21 are going to jump up to a little over $1 million. There's no way that we anticipate that a continuation budget and millage rate would be able to absorb all that. We anticipate that we would need a millage rate increase to absorb that, or decrease the level of service in some other area. So we couldn't maintain our existing level of service and absorb that significant of a step. It's about $165,000, I believe, maybe $170,000. So kind of pause here and have some discussion. I think I had written down, Dallas had put some bullet points in there, additional road paving. I would expand on that and say road maintenance. Quite a bit of dialogue, especially recently, about maintenance of unpaved road. I'll tell you, our current level of service is to grade on a, for our unpaved roads, is to grade on a 3-week cycle, which is fairly robust in the industry. I'm not suggesting that it's appropriate or inappropriate for Newberry. I would tell you that a 3-week grading cycle within the industry is fairly robust. And we have increased funding in next year's budget for additional lime rock so that we can focus more on the road base. If there was a discussion about, well, what if we were to significantly increase for road grading activities? It was just kind of a what if. So we did an analysis, performed an analysis over the last couple days, and if we wanted to go to a continuous road grading cycle, right now our motor grader operates about 20% of the time, and the person that operates it, the other 80% of his time is allocated in other public works duties. So we couldn't just simply say he's going to grade more frequently than he does without expecting a level of service decline somewhere else. But if we wanted a full-time motor grader operator, we believe that we could grade these roads on a weekly cycle, and that the annual cost to do that, the annual cost increase to do that, would be somewhere in the $100,000 range. If you include the cost of the equipment, the current piece of equipment we have is paid for, so it's about $85,000 without equipment cost. If you roll a depreciation factor in there for a motor grader, it gets up to about $110,000. So if the commission, whether this year or any time in the future, the commission wants to know, well, how much would it cost to just have a dedicated motor grader and operator running around the city on a continuous loop? Other counties, I think Gilchrist County has 4 or 5 of those people. They never leave the seat. Levy County may have 4 or 5 of those people. Now, they have a lot more miles to go, so they are continuously in the seat, but they're still on a 3 to 4 week grading cycle.
Well, Mike, before we answer the question of do we want more grading, what is the issue with our roads? Is it the amount that they're graded, or is it the amount of rock that's on the road? You're going to say it's a combination of both.
Mr. Mayor, I primarily I'd say that the biggest issue with our unpaved roads is perception. Mike New's opinion, and we have Jamie, who has more expertise in this area than me, but I would say that by and large the biggest problem with our unpaved roads in Newberry is perception. That I can't think of an unpaved roads system unless you are on a weekly basis out there continuously maintaining them basis, that after a large storm event like we had Monday night, I mean, we had cats and dogs rain Monday afternoon, and the roads were in bad shape Tuesday, and everyone was complaining. I think we had a similar storm over the weekend. The only way around that is paving, and the problem with our unpaved roads is we don't have adequate lands to put stormwater, whether they're paved or not. If we pave them, we're going to be required to have adequate lands for stormwater. Most of these roads came to the city through prescriptive easements. They're inadequately wide, and once they have an impervious service, with current laws about installing impervious service, we're going to have to get stormwater permits, and so we're going to be acquiring land just for drainage, and that may or may not happen. So I'd say our primary issue is perception. Beyond that, I think that Jamie would advise, and I would advise, that we be a little more liberal with lime rock, and we intend to do that. We propose that in the funding. If we get more lime rock base on the roads, I think that our motor grader operator is as good as we're going to find. I think he's extremely good getting the roads crowned and having ditches so that water doesn't stand in the roads. That's what makes the roads go bad, is the water on them. And then people driving across a wet surface, and it beats the fines out, and it leaves that washboard that you feel when you're riding down the road. So that's my response, is mostly perception, some lime rock. I think frequency we're generous on. Other municipalities go 4 to 6 weeks. We're at 3-week cycle. I don't think it's our grading frequency.
Commissioner Coleman?
What is the cost per mile of chip and seal? Or you gotta be exact, but well,
Current values that we're hearing from Alachua County, and they're the only folks in our region that are doing a chip seal program, $110,000 per mile. It does, and we do have a conversation to maybe have about that. I get one of the things we want to say is that what is something we've cautioned a lot. Chip sealing is not paving, and chip sealing, the life of a chip seal is not that good. We spent a lot of time on 15th, Southwest 15th, doing maintenance. We're starting to see some of the other roads in Newberry that have been chip sealed that are having an increase in maintenance. The life of chip seal seems to be somewhere south of 10 years. Life of pavement seems to be somewhere north of 30 years. So, and it's not to say from our perspective that chip seal can't be a step towards paving, especially if we focus on good road base. But so chip seal's about 110,000 a mile. Paving is going to be closer to 400,000 a mile, maybe 3 to 4 times. One of the things that I would just float, and I don't know that we can get enough traction to do anything now, but for the additional 100,000 a year or 110,000 a year that it would cost to put a full-time operator continuously grading our roads and pay for fuel and vehicle maintenance and pay depreciation on that motor grader. Let me pull out the sheet that I wrote all that down on. We could fund 3 miles of road paving. So we could pave 3 miles of unpaved road. We just take out a loan. It's 20-year loan at a normal depreciation rate or interest rate of 3%, and we would get 3 miles worth of road paving out of that, or 15 miles worth of chip sealing. 20-year mortgage, and staff would never recommend a 20-year note on chip seal. We never want our note to exceed the life of the product, and we think that 20 years exceeds the life of the project. But if we made it a 10-year note on chip seal, we could still get 7.5 miles. So not necessarily have to make a decision on tonight that that's what we want to do. If we want staff to explore that and come back with firmer numbers than what we developed in the last 2 days after having those hard rain events and hearing more public outcry about we need to do something, knowing for certain that the county is out on our road deal. We think that if the commission were going to recommend let's spend an extra $100,000 a year on road grading, that staff might propose a substitute. Would you consider taking that into a debt service payment and let's just either chip seal or pave them and then just pay debt service instead of paying somebody to grade them?
but even paving is not gonna solve Watermelon Pond Road, right?
It would. There would be.
Paving would.
Huh?
Paving would. solve
Paving
it.
would.
Well, I'm saying that we don't own it all.
But we'd have to still deal with the stormwater. But
And we would have to deal with stormwater, and we think we could, thank you. We think we could deal with stormwater, but it would definitely be the unknown, because it would be the property owners adjacent to the road in the low areas that are gonna have to
But-
pitch in and allow us to do that.
Right, but how many miles of that Watermelon Pond Road is the county's?
About half, so I think
3
it's 4.5 miles. And if, I mean, I would not recommend that we pave any county roads. I would say that we figure the portions that are the cities and pave them and invite the county to consider doing something similar or reconsider their agreement with us to get there. I'd also suggest that if you say, let's go pave rural, unpaved roads, Mike, what's your recommendation? Mike's recommendation is that we get some sort of an assessment from the adjacent property owners. Some sort of assessment. It can be 25%, it could be 50%. We may end up in a 3-way split. I think Commissioner Norfleet had an excellent idea. Let's talk to the state of Florida. They have a park down at the end of the road. Maybe they'll fund it. So that's on my list of things to do is contact the state of Florida. But if the commission says, staff, we want you to figure out a road plan. In fiscal year 20, we want you to come up with a road plan so that we can start thinking about how we would fund that in fiscal year 21. That would be a perfect direction for us to have. I think that we could get that all figured out in this upcoming fiscal year and have plenty of alternatives for the commission to consider when we get into the budget cycle for fiscal year '21.
But all-inclusive is not going to fix the problem, because we're only gonna get half if we pave it.
Right. Unless the county wants to come in.
Well,
And I would ask if the commission is interested in this, clearly Watermelon Pond Road is high on the priority, but I'm not sure it's the highest priority. We have lots of dirt roads that have a lot of folks on them that think their road is in more need. I think, to me, and not to necessarily disagree with the manager, when you go to Gilchrist County, I would say those roads are better. I think what we have is a population problem. All of Gilchrist County is 40,000 people. So they are able to maintain those roads and then not have very many people drive on the roads. When I grew up here, there was 1,200 people in Newberry, and so when you graded a road, it stayed graded for a while. Now we have such traffic on these roads that it's hard to keep up with it. So, and we have people moving into Newberry. Manager said we're over 6,500. Last time I saw it, we were at 6,200. And the last time I saw it wasn't very many months ago. And so we have a lot of folks who are moving onto dirt roads, never lived on dirt roads before. They don't know what they're getting into, and they have a higher expectation of a service level than is really warranted. But all that being said, we still have a flood of people moving into the city of Newberry, and the problem is not going to go away. So I think we have already budgeted in greater amount of lime rock to be put out this year. I would ask the commission to consider having staff come back to us with some sort of plan for identifying which of these roads are costing us the most to grade and maintain with material, and prioritizing it that way of the ones that are furthest out, the ones that cost the most, however we want to go, whatever methodology you want to use. But we can't just say forever, you bought onto a dirt road and it is the way it is. We need to have some sort of long-term plan here for how we're going to handle this, whether it's another grader and a higher frequency, whether we want to chip seal. If you go down to 30th, that chip seal road is not as old as 15th. It's a better methodology. They got significantly better in the 5 years or so, but it's also nowhere nearly highly trafficked as 15th. 15th has 2 or 3 neighborhoods on it, and that road gets a whole lot of traffic. It should be paved now with that amount of traffic. 30th has that section that's chip sealed. There's 20 people that live on that road, and then the rest of the people are passing through, So I think what the manager's laid out is warranted. We'll spend a little more on rock this year, and let's get some sort of a plan for how we move forward on this later. But let's put it pretty high on our priority list of how we're going to deal with this, so that next budget year we have a concept. Do I have a head nod for that? Anybody? Commissioner Norfleet?
What's the mileage on the chip sealed roads that the city has, and what's the mileage that the city has on unpaved roads?
We have that in a PowerPoint presentation, don't we? Oh, look at there. So that's unpaved roads in the downtown area. So in the downtown area, we have 8,900 feet of unpaved roads. So in the rural areas, we have 8.8 miles of unpaved roads. And I don't have them, I don't have in this presentation, we don't have oh yeah, we do, 4.5 miles of chip seal road. Last bullet point down there. No, sir. The unpaved would be dirt, and then the chip sealed roads would be a separate category. And we're also maintaining 7.5 miles of unpaved roads for the county, plus some chip sealed roads for the county. that are not on that slide. So we're getting there. The county paved 5 or 6, or chip sealed 5 or
Chip
6
sealed.
miles. That's helped our maintenance cost, that we're not out there grading those roads any longer, 226 and 202.
Commissioner Coleman?
It's only, I mean, that, I was thinking, God, we're gonna millions and millions, but we can say every road would be paved at $3.5 million.
If of the 8.8 miles that are unpaved,
That's what I'm talking about.
times 400,000 a mile, correct.
3.52.
Yes, sir. But, and with the caveat that we'd have to do something with stormwater, but it can be done. It's just, it adds a significant wrinkle to the project. It's not just go out, create a sub-base, put in rock, and pave over top. We would have to be a big focus on stormwater, and we would try not to pipe a thing. I guess the only thing that we would consider piping is cross piping.
Well, we're looking at, if we could do that in a 3 year cycle, or 3 years, or 5 years. It's not that.
I mean,
It's not as bad as I thought it was.
Right, and I think that's where we all were. I mean, we were thinking before $1 million a mile, and we were thinking a lot more miles. Now that, and, 4 years ago, right as I left your seat and moved over here, we started this massive plan to figure out who owns the county roads, who owns the city roads, what the mileage is, all that kind of stuff, really and truly, so we could get to this point right here, and we would know exactly what's ours, what's not ours, how much traffic's on this road, what's our priority list. So I think we've got the beginnings of the ability to truly attack this, like you're saying, on a 3 to 5 year. Let's figure out how we want to do it, and then give it a 5-year time period, and we can go all the way around the city, and we can figure this thing out.
Well, I've been on a dirt road most of my life, and it don't matter how many times that motor grader goes through. I can tell you right now, if it gets dry, you're gonna have, maybe we need to hand out pamphlets at closing attorneys when they're closing, because, when it's dry, you're gonna have ripples, and when it rains, you're gonna have runoff. It's just the way it is.
Well, I think we also need to have a conversation with our realtors, because I have yet to speak to somebody who doesn't tell me that they were told when they bought that house that it was gonna be paved
Yeah.
within a year. And I said, were they wearing a City of Newberry shirt with a logo on it? Because if they
Right.
weren't wearing a City of Newberry shirt, I'm
Well,
sorry.
And I know I hadn't been here, I'm not an original Newberian, but I've been here my whole life. And I can tell you, there's parts of Watermelon Pond Road that I've never seen lime on. It's always been sandy and some, that's where you can really get down on it when you're heading down there. I liked it because it was smoother, but it was limed all the way. I had a lady on the phone the other night, and I'm like, well, dadgum, I've been around here
stuck
for
too many
50-something
times.
years, and I ain't never seen lime on it.
Yeah. But to Commissioner Coleman's points, this is not an insurmountable task. I just think we need to do a little more due diligence about how we go about it. However, there is, not for unpaved roads, but while we are talking about roads, there is another road maintenance item that I think is a high priority, and I want to apologize because I have been meaning to bring this up at every single budget workshop. 46th does not have any white striping. When it's at night, it's very hard to see when you're about to go off. When it's raining, it's really hard to see. We've got some elderly people that live down that road. I believe we have some numbers on what that would cost, and I'm going to hand it off to staff here to talk about this in a minute. But also on 46, years ago, maybe 20 years ago, a sinkhole opened up on that, and a guy drove off into it about 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I believe the county came in and repaired it, but where that repair has happened, you can see the sinkhole is slowly making its way down to where you can just about catch air on it now. If you hit it at 55, 60 miles an hour, you come up. So I think we have to address, I think the striping is a safety issue. I know that the emerging sinkhole is an issue. So I think both of those issues we need to consider here tonight. Mr. Manager, do you have?
Mr. Mayor, coincidentally, we had been looking at that through the budget cycle. Again, our apologies for not bringing it forward, but we reaffirmed over the last couple of days what was associated with that. And I guess I'll start with the striping. Striping, there are two methodologies for striping. You can use a reflective paint, which has a very short life but is much less expensive, or you can use thermo paint. It's probably got a more technical name, which has much greater longevity. Reflective painting is $5,200 a mile for a rural county road like what we're talking about. Thermoplast is more than twice that at $13,000 a mile. So, but staff has also talked about, well, we have 60 miles of road in inventory, but most of those are local streets that don't require this type of striping. So really, 46 is about the only road in our inventory that requires rural road striping. That it totals, it's got two segments. There's the segment west of US 27, it's 3.2 miles, and then there's the segment east of 27, which is a little longer than that, down to 170th Street, which is 3.8 miles, thereabouts. To paint for the segment west of 27 is $16,000. To thermo would be $42,000. The other segment would be $20,000 for paint and $50,000 for thermo.
And Mike, what is the longevity between the paint? Tell me that again.
Paint is going to be less than 5 years. Less than 5 years.
Thermo paint is
6 to 15.
Well, that's a pretty big gap. 6 to 15. I get one more year out of it than the paint are 3 times longer.
Jamie has more expertise than I. He provided me with some information. He sent me an email link today that I didn't get a chance to read.
Okay.
But a lot of thermoplast depends on where. So I think the shorter life would be heavily traversed area where you're getting a lot of vehicular traffic. And I don't think that 46 necessarily meets that criteria. But Jamie is the one that said, hey, that really we're talking about a collector road that needs that type of striping, and we only have one,
Right.
and that's it. So it's not a program that we're gonna every year be spending $50,000 on striping. If we go with thermoplast, it's really this one segment that we would be addressing, and then hopefully we don't have to do anything for another 10 to 15 years.
Is one more reflective than the other? Is
I
white
don't
paint and thermo same reflectivity?
Jamie would be best to answer that.
Jamie, can you come down and why don't you just hang out at the podium so
While
we
he's
get done with
coming
this
down.
conversation?
You
Commissioner
know what's a
Baldwin?
daggone shame is 46 really needs to be repaved. I'm not a road engineer, but here we're gonna put that paint right on top of a road that's bad. Why wouldn't we just do so Miss Gwen can't we can keep her in so she don't get off in the ditch and not do the center lines? I mean, I don't know.
Well, and if that's a concern, I mean, when we were thinking about transferring 46 to the county as part of the roads agreement, the county staff came out and evaluated 46th, and they gave it it's in fair condition. Their commission specifically asked if we were trying to give them our worst road, and they said no, it's compared to other county roads, it's in fair condition. But if we think that we were going to do a resurfacing project out there in very near future, and it's not in our CIP, I would say maybe we go with a paint to tie us over if we do anything at all, or if we think it's going to be a 10-year cycle before we do any resurfacing, then we'd consider thermoplast. Jamie's our expert on this.
I would say thermoplastic wear depends on the amount of traffic, the grade of thermoplastic you put down, and the type. It's a little more reflective. It's got a much longer lifespan than traffic paint. If you were going to put thermoplastic down, to Commissioner Coleman's point, I wouldn't do it till after you fix the dip naturally, and a little bit west of where that dip is, right before you come to 266th intersection, there is a very short segment there that there is some failure that I would repair before I invested in thermoplastic, but it's not a long segment, it's a short segment.
Okay, so I get, my question on 46 is, Jamie, what's your estimate for repairing the sinkhole? Not it's not a sinkhole, but the spot that's soon to be a sinkhole, the dip. Speed table, the reverse speed table. Yeah.
Well, I had a contractor look at it, and naturally, without having geotech or knowing what was underneath it, just for the removal of the asphalt, base repair, reestablishing a good base, changing the cross pipe there, and putting asphalt back, he was in the $40-something thousand range. I think that's a little low because you're not sure what you're going to get into with the sinkhole. But what we could do, and what I've suggested and discussed with the manager, is we could take on the actual repair of the sinkhole itself once the road was closed and the asphalt was removed. The city could, do the repair on the sinkhole, bring it up, establish a good base, and get to the elevation that the contractor could work off of. So I think you would be in the $50,000 range with us doing the other as in-kind services.
Okay, we have a lot to consider here tonight. So I'm not gonna ask anybody to say yay or nay. I just want it, as we listen to everything that we need to consider, these are the things I'd like to consider at the very top, because we know it's a problem. We know it's getting worse. I've watched it sink a little bit lower each and every year. To me, I don't think we can continue to put it off. So to me, it's at the top of the list, but we do have a lot to consider. I would put the striping. I think I would be fine with the paint at this point in time. I think it needs something. But to Commissioner Coleman's points about the road, and I don't necessarily see us having money to repave a road that I would have to agree with the county is at least in fair condition. I agree with Commissioner Coleman, it could use it, but it hasn't moved up the priority list right now. But if we stripe it and we try to get 5 to 7, maybe push it to 7 years, maybe we'll be having a different conversation in that time frame. Yeah. So, is everybody in agreement? If we do the striping, it'd be the paint, not the thermoplasty? And what was the price for the paint for both segments of road?
For both segments of road, thank you.
36,000 for paint.
For paint, that's both segments, and yes.
Okay, so 36K for the paint, and the sinkhole is 50, which is a round number, right? 50 for the
86,000.
sinkhole. Okay, Commissioner Farnsworth.
Who actually puts the paint down? Is it,
We would hire a contractor. I guess
you
Jamie's
have to
here.
hire
I'll let him
somebody, I
speak.
mean, something has to be done by,
Striping contractor.
okay. So that amount you quoted includes that?
That's correct.
Okay, before we open up for public comment on the topic at hand, which is road maintenance, road repair, any other questions from staff on grading, paving, chip sealing, what we're spending now, what's in the budget, what's not in the budget, any of those kinds of things? Commissioner Coleman.
There's also, there's not enough people living back there, but it is a city road, is 15th Avenue. And it's, it's terrible. But that is a city road, and more and more people are moving back there. And we ain't graded that bad boy in a long time. So, but I think that might be for next year.
You're referring to 15th Avenue past Oak?
West, yeah, past on 337.
got second curve goes down, right?
That's
Mr.
30th.
That's
No, that's 30th.
Fifteenth
Mr.
is off.
15th is just past where Fowler's building,
Mr.
down
Mayor,
there on the right.
if I could, it doesn't show up on our inventory, and I don't have anything in the records as it being a city road.
It's not.
Well, that would be the second road that I've discovered is labeled, but as in our, there's no
Really?
official actual creation of that road. So that would be, if that's true, that would be the second road.
It's a county road, or?
It's a,
I think it's not
it's
a
a
road.
private road.
Or-
It's a privately maintained road, is what our
Because
inventory
the
says.
city, because the city used to maintain it. So,
Mr. Mayor, in the discussion with the planning and zoning director, it's his understanding that Carol Maddox and the Colemans own it by, they share that, it's a private
not this
road.
Coleman.
Yeah.
It's more than one call.
But it's our understanding it's a private road. We can research that and clarify.
I know, and I'm going way back, but the 70s, it was in the I know that's a long way back, but in the 70s, probably into the 80s, it was graded by the city.
Well, I think once you're going back that far, there were probably a whole lot of favors that were done.
Okay, I'll hush now then. I don't want any of that.
Okay, any other questions for Commissioner Hertzman?
So I just want to clarify, so the road work we're talking about, is that, because we jumped off on the road work when we were talking about the millage rate difference. So are we talking about that additional 150,000 if we remain at the .362?
We have not got there yet, and
All right.
that's
We
why I'm not
deviated
asking.
right off
Yeah.
of there, so-
Well,
Right.
and we have considerations,
Okay.
but we have, most of this packet still to go through.
Right.
So
So I
I'm
didn't know
keeping
if-
a running tally of things that we think need to happen, and then at the end of the night, we'll come back to this question of the millage rate and what we want, how we want to handle that. Some of these things, we may decide, we just can't do it this year. Some of these things are infrastructure requirements, safety requirements. We may say we have to do it this year. We just have to figure out how to pay for it. So I'm not asking anybody to head nod on anything. The only head nod I asked for was the paint, not the thermalite. If we go forward, we go forward with the paint. So I'm just gonna keep that list. Mr. Manager?
No, finish your thought and then.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep that list and the sinkhole. So the sinkhole and the paint, that's gonna be at the top of my list at the end of the night of how do we get that done in this upcoming year? Okay? Okay, public comment. I'm sorry, Jim, hang on one second. Mr. Manager?
Just along the lines of projects that have arisen in the last 2 weeks, if the commission will recall, we had a few sinkholes developed in Newberry Oaks in the very large retention basins. This caused us to put some focus there, and we've noticed that we have quite a few children that use those retention basins for recreation areas. And our staff have alerted us to a concern that there are too many chimneys and potential sinks in that area, in their opinion, for children to be playing in them. So we've discussed internally fencing them. Now, they're very large basins, so fencing costs are not cheap. But the one that had the sinkholes, which is on 232, the cost to fence it with a field fence, which we think would be appropriate as long as it wasn't an ugly field fence, but stopping short of chain link, would be $10,000. The one further to the north, to be fenced with field fence, would be in the $12,000 range. If the commission says staff figure out how to make that happen, we would probably propose to fence them across 2 fiscal years, doing the highest priority in year 1 and the next one in year 2.
Okay, I want to stay on roads right now since we have public comment.
Absolutely.
We'll come back to that after we have public comment on roads.
Could we go back one slide or forward one slide?
Sure.
Not that one, the other one, other
Back.
way. Where you showed the how much cost per mile.
I think that was a whole other section. There
This
it
isn't
is.
doing
Right
it?
here.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
doing it. Here we go.
Oh. He always goes one too many.
It's not this one?
It
No,
is.
this is the one he wants.
You can click it one more time there.
You had one, $400,000 per mile, chip seal road to pave it, and then there's 500. I'm wondering if we actually added up all of our roads, and we actually turned this all out in the bid, I mean, all of our roads, and turned it out in the bid, could we get that number down and then actually do this much cheaper? And then
I mean,
do
I
it in a
thi-
bond?
I think that's at the back of what the city manager is suggesting. Let's
Okay.
get a plan.
Yeah.
And instead of doing it half a mile here and then
And
doing.
then bring down the cost by doing it as
Right.
a many miles, we're gonna do,
Right.
you know,
You're gonna get the whole
25
package.
miles of this, and we're gonna do it, and we can do it a whole lot cheaper maybe. And maybe we might get the
agree.
paint even cheaper on that road, or even
Right.
get that dip fixed in the road even cheaper, so, just thought.
Yeah, I don't know that we're ready. I don't know that the dip can wait for the due diligence on the whole package, but it may. Okay, any other public comment on roads, road maintenance? Okay, towards the, and I'm not sure if we're staying on any kind of a structure here, but towards those basins, like I don't see a field fence keeping a kid out. I think they climb right over it. I've seen them climb over it. Wouldn't a signage simply saying, this is not a child's play area, please stay out, and now it's up to the parents to say you have to obey the signs?
Mr. Mayor, it's a liability play. If we sign it, our liability is reduced to an extent. If we fence it with a 4-foot high fence, and sign it, we wouldn't simply put a fence up. We would fence it and sign it. It would reduce our risk a fair step beyond that, because it takes the thought process being in risk, and the city attorney's gone, is walking through an unfenced area and missing a sign is one level of consciousness, but climbing over a fence that is signed, that is definitely a premeditated decision, even by youth, and so our risk is further mitigated by that. Now, we make decisions every day about risk, so I'm not suggesting that we have to fence them. One of our staff had experience with a youth that had a similar event happen in Chiefland. Actually, 2 of our folks in Public Works were familiar with an event in Chiefland where a child was playing in a retention basin, wound up in a chimney, went down. I don't think the child was.
The child was unhurt once they removed the child.
So, being aware of that, and I guess, when we went into the one retention basin, we found swings that parents had put up in trees. Those swings are probably down right now, but so, we would try to minimize that, but it's a risk play. I prefer not to fence basins. Usually they're fenced because of the fear of drowning, and I think that with proper side slopes and shallow depths, there's not a need. The risk is not merit the need for fencing. Sinkholes are kind of a different thing, and it's a consideration. It mitigates our risk to an extent, but it doesn't mean that no one would not climb over them.
And do you have any other projects that have
No,
popped
sir.
up in the last, this is the only?
No,
So
sir.
we can discuss this and then
We
get
can
back on
discuss
track.
this.
Thoughts on fencing? Commissioner Norfleet, was that a move to the?
If we fence the retention pond, would that reduce the liability more so than, say, the sides of the roads that fall in the ditches?
I'm sorry, would it reduce our mitigation more than what?
Than, say, the sinkholes that keep falling in on the side of the highways?
Yes, sir, I think so. And I think that it's understood that we can't prevent sinkholes. And so, where they're gonna occur, in Newberry they're gonna occur, we wouldn't fence every basin. We would fence basins that we know to have a proclivity for sinkholes. Jamie was distinguishing between, we know certain basins have had a history of having sinkholes in theirs, and those are the ones that we would propose to fence. The basins that have never had a sinkhole develop, he's not suggesting that we should consider fencing them, at least at this point.
Mr. Mayor, if I could speak to that as well, what really brought this issue to the forefront was the sinkholes we had in the front basin at Newberry Oaks a couple weeks ago. We spent 2.5 days down there filling those and brought in over 50, sir? Never did get the drone out. But we brought in over 50 loads of fill and we bailed them out. Two of my employees during that process, they spent more time in there than they normally do. And both of those afternoons, almost every child that was coming home from school cut across that north basin to 11th Road. There's also, as the manager said, there's some islands that were left out in that basin that have trees in them. Somebody has gone to Walmart or had gone to Walmart and got rope swings and whatnot and mounted there. And while those employees were working there, children continued to come back out in those basins, walk across areas that we know we had filled chimneys before, and where chimneys fall under us every time we drive across it with a mower to access those swings. So I'm not a fan of fencing basins. It's much more inconvenient for me. But there is instances where I think it's important to consider it, and these two particular basins, I think it's important to consider it.
Mike, I'm having a hard time understanding because we can't put signs up for slow children at play, because then that somehow makes the city liable that we know that children are playing in the road, right? But if we fence off, I mean, if the default position is these basins are not for recreational play, and we begin to fence off and sign them, is that not then granting that we have some liability to keep the kids out more so than the parents? Seems like we have two conflicting judicial decisions here.
I could speak to that, Mr. Mayor. The slow children play is a little bit different. It's a permissive use. It's specifically prohibited from children playing in the road. And by putting that sign, it is what they call a permissive use. It gives a false sense of security. We do have quite a few basins in the city of Newberry that are fenced now. We have other basins that we've addressed issues up in the Newberry Hills Newberry Hills area. There was some concern with four-wheelers and children playing there. We signed that, but in the 4 years I've been here, I've never had to fill a sinkhole in that. One of the concerns my employees shared with me, most of those children that were walking across that basin had that telephone right there doing that, and they weren't paying attention to what they were doing. And we just, if there's a way that we could, protect the city from a liability standpoint and ensure that, nobody was injured in those basins, we would like to try to do so.
Okay, Commissioner Coleman.
I know this is a long shot, but seeing that Mr. Weisman is almost done developing in there, have we reached out to Gary to ask him if maybe he would work with us on that?
Mr. Mayor, we have not. In all honesty, this discussion started this morning with the concern about children going through these basins. Dallas mentioned something to me. Dallas is involved in risk management, that every time our risk is always enhanced when we become aware of things. So the example I typically use on that is trees in the right-of-way. If there's a tree in the right-of-way that is in ill health and is a hazard to motorists or pedestrians in the right-of-way, as long as we're not aware, our liability is pretty limited. When someone calls us and says, hey, that tree is going to die and kill somebody, it's going to fall and kill somebody, we generally are responding within 24 hours, and if we concur with them, we have that tree on the ground within 72 hours. Street lights. If we don't know the street light's out and a motorist has an accident because he couldn't see, our liability is less than if someone has reported that the street light's out and then we just failed to take any action. So in this case, with these retention basins, we weren't aware a week ago of the number of children playing in these basins. And after spending the time we've spent working in them and understanding the amount of sinkholes that we have in there and seeing the number of children, our liability has increased now that we've become aware.
Commissioner Harrison.
Other than the swings and the children playing in them, obviously the drop-off after school is a function of where they're dropping, the bus is dropping children in that neighborhood. can we reach out to the school district and see if they'll drive around that loop? Because it is a circle, so it's not a one-way. It's half a mile, I know, I run it. That they could drop on the other side on 11th Road also to eliminate the crosswalk through that retention pond?
Mr. Mayor, I can definitely do that. What Commissioner Herson is referencing, children is sort of like the cow path. They don't take the shortest route, and so that might alleviate some of the issue.
But
Commissioner Coleman?
it's not gonna stop the football games out there, and there's a lot of them.
And what's the grand total for the fencing, Mike? It was 18,000?
22,000
22,000?
for those two basins.
You know, what I would suggest on the basins, guys, is that, I'd like to hear from Scott on the liabilities, those kinds of things. If you guys may be ready to move forward with it, but we have the 50,000 contingency still in this budget, so we don't necessarily have to budget for that this year. We could use that contingency money and say, okay, we've got to handle that situation, as we see fit, unless you guys, I mean, again, I'm not asking anybody to say yay or nay right now. We'll get through all of these considerations and we'll tally up how much we've got, how much we need. And then we'll come back and make some decisions about how we're gonna handle those things. Commissioner Farnsworth?
Yeah, too, I would like to hear from Scott and find out what his view is, regarding maybe a 6-foot fence would be more appropriate than a 4-foot fence, or I'm sure that just signs, it doesn't sound like it would be an appropriate thing, but, I think we should, talk to him first and find out what his suggestion is.
That's kinda, I mean, in my mind, if I know the kid's gonna climb over the field fence, then either, if it's really trying to keep him out, you gotta go up higher, or if it's just that the sign, the fence and the sign reduces the liability, then you put smaller fence up and you sign it, there's a barrier, but I think we need to hear from legal on that, but we'll put it on the list of things that we'll probably bypass that one. All right, any more, on that? Public comment on the basins?
I'm getting a lot of exercise tonight. I live in that neighborhood. The people back in that area are different, I guess would be a good way to put it. They're extremely community-minded. They're on Facebook. I think we ought to just go to Facebook and tell the parents, keep your kids out of the damn retention pond.
And Mr. Mayor, we can sign it shortly. That's something, the signage can go up and will go up shortly. Most of these basins are backyards, some of which have privacy fenced. It would have been a lot easier for us if the developer or the property owners had put privacy fences along everyone's back property line, and then we can just fill in the gap there along where we have an access and put a gate in, and it would be done. When I asked Jamie about that, he said that the number of privacy fences is a little too spotty for us to just simply try to fill in all those gaps. I think Commissioner Herson's suggestion or Commissioner Coleman's suggestion that we talk to Mr. Weisman is a good one. Having had a number of discussions with Mr. Weisman, I have certain going into the conversation expectations about our level of success, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't give it our best shot. The signs can go up in a very short order, and we can have conversations with Scott shortly and have a presentation, a brief presentation on that in some city commission meeting.
If a development had an HOA, Mike, would this not fall under the responsibility of the HOA? Or would this, because the basins are ours, would be our responsibility? I know other developers fenced off their basins when the development was built.
Jamie could speak to that.
Due to the fact that we took ownership of the basins, it's our responsibility to operate and maintain them, and we do have the liability. That is one of the reasons that we don't take basins anymore. Newberry Town Center, we don't have the basins there. Newberry Corners, we don't have the basins there, but a lot of our older subdivisions, we do.
Okay, any more questions on road resurfacing, grade roads, or fencing off basins? So we made it to page 5 on our.
Mr. Mayor, and these are all general fund types of expenses. We don't have any list like this for utility fund expenses.
Right.
What you've seen at our last workshop is all we're gonna discuss. Really the only other item that's come up, and was a question mark going into our decision about law enforcement, was whether the commission wanted to consider acquiring land for a future police station or substation next fiscal year. If the commission wants to do that, we recommend that we need to purchase an acre. Staff's under the impression that ideally it would be on one of our major corridors through town, but we would identify a number of sites and ask the commission, where would you like to see it? But I guess most of the conversation centers around it being on one corridor, so we think that the appropriate number to acquire a piece of land would be $100,000 or less. And we're not suggesting that we should budget that. We just don't want the budget season to end without that being put out there for the commission. We told you that we acquired a trailer, and we got a fantastic deal on a trailer, a mobile home, modular home, for $8,000. We also told you that there were moving expenses whenever the mover got out there to look at it. We have a special modular trailer, and the moving cost to get it set up in Newberry would be $43,000. So
Is that to move it to Newberry or move it and set it up?
move it and set it up. So $43,000. If we knew that we were going to use it, staff would say that $51,000 for a 2,500 square foot modular building and the quality of this one is a very good deal. But considering some of these other expenses and considering that we went with Alachua County Sheriff's Office for an additional 2 years, meaning we have 3 years before we have to make a decision, staff doesn't presume that the commission wants us to spend the $43,000 or acquire a piece of land next fiscal year, but we'd like feedback on those two items.
Okay. Feedback on those two items. Commissioner Farnsworth.
I personally think we should start preparing for taking it over and having our own police department. The 2 years from now or 3 years from now, I have no idea what the county and the sheriff's department will brew up and throw at us, and then we won't have any option other than to go with them. And so I think we should start looking forward to taking care of that.
And to Commissioner Farnsworth's point, just so we have a clarity on the timeline for law enforcement, we have roughly 13 months left on our current contract. Monday night, we added 2 additional years to that, so we have 3 years. We've always said 12 months is the drop dead. If we don't have 12 months, we're not even going to try to start our own police department. We've also always been more comfortable with 18. So if we have 3 years left, we have 1 year where we do not have to talk about law enforcement whatsoever. At the end of this current contract, though, I'm going to ask you guys to authorize staff to begin negotiations again and to give it 6 months so that you guys will once again be making a decision. You'll know what the numbers are from ASO to continue on with them, and then you'll be able to decide whether you want to continue with ASO or you want to have 18 months to start your own police department. So it sounds like we have 3 years, but once you remember that we really want to give ourselves 18 months, if we can't afford ASO, if we want to have whatever the reason is, whatever the cause is, you've really only got about a year of not having to worry about that at all before we begin. So to those questions about acquiring the land, those kinds of things, kind of now is the time, right, Commissioner Coleman?
So what is the time frame to get this thing moved? I mean, if they've sold it to us, how much time until we got to get it out off that place?
Mr. Mayor, we have to pay for the trailer by next Friday. If we don't pay for it, it goes to the number 2 bidder. So it's a good off-ramp for us if we decide we're not going to move it. After we've paid for it, Jamie, have they given us a time frame for when it has to be off their property?
I believe from the time you pay for it, it has to be removed in 30 days.
But what is the moving cost versus the setting up cost? Just to move it and set it somewhere until you have dirt. Is that a different price than the 43,000 to move it and set, because setting up is,
This is a 3-unit modular, with concrete floors on metal girders. So it comes into 3 pieces.
it's a really
Has
good
to-
deal for $8,000.
Has to be set back together. The moving cost that the manager has listed there includes the engineering and tie down to set it up on concrete piers. It does not include anything to redo the trim or whatnot on inside where you make those 3 pieces back together, the siding or the shingles where you make those pieces back together, nor does it include any electric, water, or sewer to be able to put climate control back on the building and ensure that it didn't deteriorate. If the commission does decide to go ahead and move it, I would encourage that it be set up and the air, water, and sewer hooked back up to maintain it, and understand that if it wasn't at its permanent location, there would be moving costs to relocate it again.
So we'd be looking at more like $90,000, right? Because we don't have anywhere to put it for the police department. So if that wanted to be the police department, we'd have the $50,000 to get it out here immediately, and then another $40,000 to move it back. Am I understanding that
Mr. Mayor,
roughly correctly?
I don't think it would double the number, because a large portion of that moving cost is to get it all the way from the Kirkpatrick Center down a DOT highway when the DOT permits and things associated with it. While I do think there would be a cost to relocate it to a different site, I don't think it would be double. You wouldn't be paying that same $50,000 twice.
Thoughts, guys? I mean, I hate to miss a good deal, but do we have a place to put it? And do we want to expend that money until we have a place to put it? I don't know that we'll have a chance to get a deal like this again.
If,
Commissioner Farnsworth?
if, we go ahead and acquire it and put it someplace, it can still be utilized by other departments in the interim, couldn't it, or?
I mean,
Do
I
you have-
believe
do you
we
have
need
need
some
for
office
extra?
space down at our wastewater treatment plant, so that might be a location for it. I don't know if we can fit it in the city yard, or that we have a need for it in the city yard. I know that we have periodically talked about the need down there eventually for some office space.
Mr. Mayor, we do have in our 5-year capital improvement plan, a project to, build a storage area, locker rooms and offices with showers there. Currently, this is the, only wastewater facility that I've ever seen set up that didn't have those, accessories to accommodate if you had a wastewater, spilled on you or whatnot. If the commission chose to move it, it could go to the sewer plant as a stopgap until you had a permanent site to put it. But I would encourage that it be fully set up, air, water, and sewer, just with the understanding that you would have cost to move it to another location if you chose to move it as the police station.
Would this modular home fit all of those criteria for what you've been looking at?
No, sir, it would be
Doesn't have a shower, right?
It would be a good stopgap measure, but I don't think it would be a permanent solution to what we need for the wastewater plant. We had tried to extend that project out to when we potentially would have to enlarge the wastewater plant, because we're anticipating that we would need additional lab space, blower space, and a motor control center for the electric switchgear, and we could locate that all in one metal building. But it would be a stopgap measure until the wastewater plant was expanded.
And to Commissioner Farnsworth, I think it was his question, is there, and the manager just stepped out, is there any other site, any other department that has been chomping at the bit for office space? I'm looking at all my department heads. No.
Mr. Mayor, I believe most of the departments are looking for more space, but we're wrapping that into our city hall expansion plan. There's no departments that immediately need the space, especially not 2,500 square feet.
Okay. Mr. Farnsworth?
When is the, city hall expansion plan supposed to be completed?
Mr. Mayor, I believe in fiscal year 2020, we have Phase 2 of our facilities master plan, which will be presented to the commission sometime in September, the first part of that. And then I believe we're scheduled to begin design on City Hall expansion in 2021, with construction beginning a year or two after that.
And with that expansion, of these offices across the street and the brick school building, are they gonna, be empty and the personnel from them come to the expansion?
Mr. Mayor, the City Hall, nobody anticipates in saving the City Hall annex for city staff. The discussion of Little Red Schoolhouse is a policy decision that we'll be bringing to the commission. And I believe we are scheduling a workshop sometime in September with our architects who are working on our facilities master plan to show you the plans, to show you how much space we need and start that ball rolling.
I was just thinking that if we have, some empty space that could be utilized for the, police department in the future.
Commissioner Harrison?
Would this modular building have an adequate space to, if we want to stand up our own police force, for them to be housed there for an interim amount of time until we develop a permanent space for them?
I think it's larger than the High Springs Police Department building.
Along the
Same line, same size.
We think we could get at least 5 years out of it.
Mr. Mayor, it's, in my understanding, its current use, or what was its current use, was law enforcement training at the Kirkpatrick Center.
Correct.
Commissioner Norfleet?
If you acquire the building, how much, is it gonna add to your facilities and budget? And is there gonna be any remodeling that's gonna need to take place on that building after you get it set up, for whatever you wanna use it for?
Absolutely. It will require, remodeling for specific needs. I haven't been inside, I anticipate that. I don't think it's significant, talking about potentially interior walls and potentially some interior paint and flooring, furnishings. So, in terms of, things like annual, energy cost and internet cost and things like that, and we would also, one of our bigger costs might be setting it up for IT connection. We set up a temporary office in the yard for a staff position that we put in the budget this year. Went through that, so we think that is the kind of expense that is absorbed in a continuation budget, but we certainly don't pretend that there is no additional expense in that. We typically would perform that work in-house with our facilities crews and our very capable field crews.
Commissioner Coleman?
Sometimes you gotta cut a fat hog, and I think this one here is one we're gonna have to, even though I sure didn't want to. I wanted to keep him around, but the way we're looking at this, we got another year, and I know it's a great deal. Mike was on top of that, but we might need to let this go to the second bidder, especially after, it looks like we're not like desperate yet. And if and who knows, over where finance is, that might end up being when we start our own department, because I'm sure they'll be over here.
I tend to agree. It's a
Yeah.
great deal. but-
Mike did good. It's just that we don't.
Right. We don't have a place to put it. I'm not hearing from any department head that it really fits a need.
Right.
And to be quite honest, if we start a police department, I mean, there may be a modular home at the beginning, but I don't see a modular home
Right.
as a long-term. So even if it's half the cost, we're still looking at $70,000 to move it one time, move it somewhere else. I'd rather put $70,000 into the actual building. So unless anybody has any, someone's gonna jump up and say, I need this building, and it was only $8,000, and then, anybody else have any thoughts? Again, great job, staff, for seeing the deal, getting it. We have another wrinkle?
No, sir, not a wrinkle. I think maybe to tag on to what you said, if you're in Butler Plaza where all the new construction is and the overpass over I-75, Gainesville Fire Rescue has a brand new modular building that they operate as a fire station. They paid $150 for that brand new building set in place. So to your point, that's maybe potentially $70,000 towards a modular
Brand new.
building in the future. It just wanted to pass that information along. It's not $500,000 for one of those buildings. It looks to be about $150,000 for a modular building, brand new.
Brand new.
Less
And
than
set
that.
up.
And set up.
Commissioner Harrison?
I think the fact that we don't have a permanent residence for it to be sat, and the purchase price is $8,000, but the walk out the door price is not $8,000, so I think that we'd be better off banking that money or not spending that money and hold on till we're ready to go.
Okay. Commissioner Farnsworth?
Yeah, to Matt's point, can that money be set aside?
Well, I think that's, despite this home, or this modular building, I think that still is the conversation that we need to be having. You know, because if we had an acre of dirt right now, we'd be having a different conversation right now. So, to me, I think the very first step is let's address the issue of whether we want to purchase some dirt for a future police department, which I think everybody up here believes is coming, even though everybody up here has a different timeline in mind. Now, I think everybody up here, if left to our own devices, we would love for that decision to be 15, 20 years away, but it might not be completely up to us. And, you know, certainly some of the concerns over this last process is about the timeline. And while we have done an extraordinary amount of work in terms of knowing what we have to do, we still don't have the dirt. We don't have an engineering plan for the building. We don't, you know, those kinds of things. So I would highly suggest to this commission that to continue having the legitimate option of starting a Newberry Police Department, we have to continue actually working in that direction. I don't believe that an acre of ground in Newberry is going to be cheaper 10 years from now than it is right now. So that's the kind of investment I think is good long-term planning. And if this conversation comes up again, now that's one more box that has been checked. So instead of setting aside the money for the modular home, I would encourage, let's focus on just the land first and get that question answered. Commissioner Coleman?
Whatever you do, whoever praised the Kincaid building, I do not want them here.
Agreed. Agreed.
What about the Kincaid property in the pocket?
I mean, to me, you know, I think that's a quarter of an acre,
It's too small. It is.
third of an acre.
It's less than a quarter. It's about
Yeah.
.24.
So
Like a two-story building?
that's it's vertical.
Mr. Mayor,
Vertical is more expensive.
the parking requirements for a police force, you have to have one secure parking area plus your regular parking area. So it's too small, not because of building footprint, but because building footprint plus the 2 parking areas that are required. So we think minimum 3/4 of an acre, ideal 1 to 1.2 acres.
And what I would ask your permission to ask staff to do is come back with hard numbers on 4 to 6 locations around town so that you can start having that conversation about because to me, I think where you actually want this located is a really important question. Do we want a first responder district? Do we want the police station to be next to the fire station? Do we want to put it on the other side of the railroad track so that we have our first responders split
Yeah, both on the same.
from a potential train blocking? Do we want them downtown? You know, I think this warrants a whole separate conversation all by itself before we even really get into budgeting any money for it. But we do need to set something aside for that eventuality. So if we can get staff to come back with some site locations, some different prices, and a pros and con list of those sites, But what I hear staff is putting a place marker of about $100,000 towards that, and certainly that could be over 2 budget seasons. Well, we may have that planning it out now and then making the decision, although real estate doesn't quite work on that timeline sometimes. Commissioner Coleman?
So what are we talking, $8,000 right now
No, we don't have to pay it. We just don't pay it. It goes to the second bidder.
Yeah, but the $8,000, are we gonna start some kind of contingency right now, or is that what we're talking about?
I think we're talking
I mean,
about
it's a start, I mean, when
Right.
$8,000 was going there.
and we were potentially spending 50,000 to get it moved. So I think, was that your point? Can we move that, shift that money to the buying the dirt? Now, granted, we didn't have that money budgeted. It was a concept, right? So right now I have on our list $100,000 for potentially acquiring a spot of ground. That's what I've added to my list.
Correct. And, Mr. Mayor, with regards to earmarking money, right now, all of those police station expenses our general fund. Currently, I view your earmarked money, your unrestricted general fund reserves. We set a goal of 1.6 million that we need for a rainy day. We don't think it's appropriate to utilize those funds, but every year we budget for contingency. Every year we think our expenses are going to come in under our revenues, and all those funds go into general fund reserves, unrestricted, and that would be the pot of money, a potential pot of money to earmark, or just say everything above 1.6 is available for police station or city hall expansion or those types of general fund projects.
Okay, Commissioner Herson?
Can I throw the one monkey wrench in that? Because as soon as we stand up our police department, our annual operating costs for the city just go up, and so our reserve fund has to proportionally go
Correct.
up also. So
Correct.
we'll have used up that, and we'll probably be behind, at least initially, when we do that.
What will it'll rise to probably 1.9, 1.8 in reserves
We set a million.
to have 3 months.
$1.6 million divided by 12 is times
It'd be an
3.
additional $330,000 into your.
So
general fund reserves.
1.85.
Well.
Call it
our-
1.9.
Yeah, it's 1.93. Our reserves, for fiscal year 20, your reserves need to be at 1.6 million.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Coleman?
Well, I just, right now, we got a good police department and $1 million. I just wish we could've went on, wish we could've had that 5-year deal instead of a 3. It's just a dadgum shame.
And you know, in all transparency, we have no idea where we will be in 3 years. And the last, so far, by a miracle and some really goodwill on all sides, we've been able to negotiate very reasonable deals with ASO. I anticipate our ability to continue doing that. I also anticipate that we'll be able to do that because we will have true viable options, and having options is always good in negotiation. If it's not a real option, everybody kind of knows that, and then negotiations change because we don't really have much other options. All right, you still have supplemental wild spaces funding on there? I'm sorry, any more questions on law enforcement from the dais? Public have any questions on this conversation about law enforcement? Okay, wild spaces, supplemental wild spaces funding. There's so much coming in, we have more than we anticipated.
No, sir,
That's not-
that's not at all what that means.
That's not what that means?
When we got our wild spaces funding, we anticipated, including a grant from the county, in the neighborhood of $3 million. And of that $3 million, 800,000 was earmarked for our multi-purpose fields out at Easton.
Can I interrupt you one second? Miss Linda, are you cold out there? Would you like my jacket? You sure? Okay, I'm just checking on you. All right, go ahead. You would have ripped it off yeah, all right.
So we had a plan and we had $3 million, and then Canterbury comes along and we spend $1.3 million of our 3 million, and really it wasn't, we had 2.2 discretionary because 800,000 was set aside. So out of our 2.2 discretionary funding, we spent $1.3 million on Canterbury. So we still have a list of projects, that about $1.3 million worth of projects that have no funding source. So that bullet point is just giving the commission an opportunity to supplement our wild spaces funding by increasing its millage rate cap. Again, it's not a staff recommendation. It is just a suggestion that we made a list of projects, and when we switch gears to Canterbury, we're not going to be able to fulfill the projects on that list.
Mike, and you may want to bring Travis up for this, but remind us, we got Canterbury, because I remember what was on the list. We got Canterbury, that took out the 1.3. The expansion, the 4 more fields out at Easton is a go, that's the 800.
Correct.
The volleyball fields and remodel of West Park is funded. That one's happening. The big thing that got left out that won't make it, if this Dias doesn't decide to supplement it, will be the paving of the parking lot at Easton? Or is that still Travis is dreadfully making his decision about whether he wants to come this way or not?
He'll probably see how well I do first.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, we had citywide projects in most of the parks, fencing, benches, lighting, trash receptacles, sidewalks, parking upgrades. In the neighborhood parks such as Jimmy Durden, Freddie Warmack, Low Sport, MLK. Those projects got cut for the Canterbury project, as well as we scaled back some of the Easton projects. I believe those were the main.
My question is, what made it through the Canterbury curveball?
The Easton field lights, Easton shop upgrades, Easton parking area chip seal, fencing at Jimmy Durden Park, municipal building upgrades, roof replacements at Jimmy Durden, Freddie Warmack in the municipal building,
It's in this, if you have it.
sports lighting, volleyball court at Jimmy Durden, soccer goal replacement program, Easton Newberry Sports Complex, parking, roads, lighting, drainage, batting cages, multipurpose fields, and Easton Newberry Sports Complex, concrete walkways and pads, and some other smaller projects.
What did he get wrong, Travis?
He got most of that right. It was really, we scaled everything back. So like Dallas was saying, the concrete walkways, asphalt parking lots, et cetera, at say Freddie Warmack Park, Jimmy Durden Park, those things got cut and then scaled back, receptacles, et cetera. And then at Easton, the same thing happened. We scaled it back. Asphalt parking, concrete walkways, et cetera. Everything kind of just got scaled back. And then at the smaller parks, they just got cut.
Okay. Is there anybody had a project that got cut that, Commissioner Farnsworth?
I was just wondering, when's the next round of funding from the Wild Spaces Public Places?
6 years? Is it 8 year?
It was 2025 is,
6 years.
it's 6 years out.
Okay.
And there were projects that didn't make it into our original funding request, that the commission made a decision that we would defer that to a future round of Wild Spaces funding. The projects that we cut when Canterbury came along, same thing. We didn't roll them off a list. We just deferred them. And this bullet was suggesting that if the commission wanted to try to pick up a few of those, I mean, we talked about generating an extra 150,000 in revenues. It would be the maximum amount that the commission could garner, and they may, if they chose, throw a portion of that towards Parks and Recreations to pick up some of the projects that didn't happen in Wild Spaces. Just wanted to make sure the commission was aware of that opportunity.
Does the county pay the Wild Spaces and Public Places in one lump sum at the beginning of, or how do they dole that out?
Mr. Mayor, we receive a monthly check from the state of Florida from the sales tax collections, just as we do with our other sales tax collections.
And so it's projected to be a certain amount, but you don't know what it actually is going to be.
That is correct. Each year, the state of Florida does their revenue estimates, and it includes how much revenue each city will collect in half-cent sales tax and discretionary sales or tax, like the wild spaces tax.
If the city continues to grow like it has, then hopefully that'll increase also.
It has more, yes. If we grow faster than the rest of the county, our portion of the county's taxes will go up. It has a lot to do with the economy, as it's a sales tax. Also, it has a lot to do with how well the Gators are doing. If the Gators are doing well and more people come to Gainesville and buy more things at Gator games, we see an increase in our tax
That's the reason
collections.
you should be a Gator, Mark. You really care about the
for-
city.
For example, 2 years ago when
Get your orange
Hurricane
blue shirt.
Irma canceled one of our Gator games, we saw a dip
Oh,
in
yeah.
our sales tax collections because people didn't come to Gainesville and buy things.
Well, one thing, when the Gators are playing bad and FSU comes to town, there's no change or still good revenue for that game.
I don't know, most of the Seminoles I know are pretty cheap.
Cheap is the word I'd use,
Frugal?
very frugal.
Okay, I'm not hearing any, and we can revisit this question when Commissioner Coleman comes back to the dais, but I'm not hearing that any commissioner lost a project that's near and dear to their heart, and Commissioner Coleman's field expansion is a go.
is a
So, so that one's a go. So any appetite up here to supplement the Wild Spaces funding in this year? Okay, so we'll move to, economic development projects.
Again, just, if the commission says we've already established a trim notice for 6.36, we anticipated that we'd be doing 6.36 to handle additional law enforcement costs. That went away. If the commission wants to take advantage of the additional revenue that they could get from 6.36, they could consider ED projects. We're not suggesting that they do. I mean, we've had some discussion about a downtown project. We've had some discussion about infrastructure projects that might support Ag Tech Park. We didn't have anything specific in mind. We're just kind of giving thinking points out there for the commission to consider if they elect to maintain a millage rate above 5.999, which is what the budget is established at currently.
Sure, it's always good, this is what this process is about. Throw everything out there that could possibly be so that we don't get halfway through the year and say, well, if we just thought about that earlier.
Correct.
Does anybody have any, I mean, a lot of those projects that the manager just mentioned, I think are exciting projects. I'm not sure we're ready to gear up on any of them immediately. Of course, all that changes if they get funded. But why don't we, this is the last consideration from staff?
Yes, sir, and I might
The rest of
mention-
this is just, the rest of this packet is stuff we've already gone through.
Correct.
We're not gonna
and-
go through it again tonight. This
We-
is the slide, and this is the conversation that we're having tonight.
Absolutely. And I might suggest that these bullet points were established before we
Sure.
completed the research that we discussed earlier on what we consider to be higher priority projects. Southwest 46, DIP, street paving, fences, you know, we've thrown a lot at you that you might consider, that we would consider priorities. Those were all developed by staff after this list was developed.
Sure. Okay, at this point, I know we have some folks here who'd like to address the commission and might have some further considerations for us. So let's open up the floor for public comment, public proposals. I'm looking directly at you, Miss Linda. And then we'll come back to the list and how we want, what we want and how we want to go about it. You want to take a lap around the building so you can kind of wake up a little bit? Yep. It is 8 o'clock. Does anybody need a bathroom break? We're one man down. Can we, I'm sorry, but let's take a 2-minute adjournment and let Commissioner Coleman get back here. I don't want you to have to repeat it. I don't want you to have to repeat it. So 2-minute adjournment and somebody.
Good idea.
Lead us in yoga.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will come back to order after that short adjournment. Thank you for your patience, Miss Linda.
Okay, before I start with what I just handed you, I want to let you know that one of the reasons the last two commission meetings I couldn't come because we had a rainstorm just before, I can't get out of my driveway. I have this two big holes, and it gets very deep, and you know I have that little car. So when you start paving and resurfacing, y'all know where I live. Send them on out there.
Send them.
Okay. And if I'm not here, you'll know it's because I couldn't get out. So Cindy Bass is here tonight also, and we worked this week down at the Little Red Schoolhouse. And I'm thanking you for your time. I know we're all ready to go home. But I'm here to ask you for some money for the Little Red Schoolhouse Museum. I think there's only one commissioner that went to school there. I went to school there. Cindy did. I don't know anybody else in here. Judy did. Yeah. So when they built the new elementary school, they picked up all their little chairs and desks and things and hiked them down, and Jerry Getson set everybody up. And at that time, Commissioner Farnsworth's father was instrumental in this, I think. The city took, the county let the city have the Little Red Schoolhouse. The city gave the county the place where our track is now and paved it and did whatever. So it was sort of a swap. And it just sat there. The windows were busted and broken, and it was really bad. Through the Watermelon Festival, mostly funds were raised year after year after year. We put windows in one year, and somebody came along and busted all of those out. So the next year, we put windows in again and screens to keep them from breaking the windows again. So there was hours and hours and hours spent selling Cokes and hot dogs and begging. Finally, we were able to get a grant. That was Debbie Boyd's aunt was in the state legislature and helped us to get a huge grant. We were able to get the big push and get the building completed. And the city was instrumental with helping with that. I don't know if we could have done it without Jim Sewell. Then was to collect the artifacts, get items from local families, and they started just pouring in. We got all kinds of things and installed them in our display cases. Pictures were donated. They've been framed and hung on the walls. Since the original organization, it has basically been through citizen donations that have continued to help preserve the Little Red Schoolhouse. Tonight, I want to ask you for some money to continue the process. For over 20 years, various committees have not asked for city funds and have not received any city funds. Not to say we haven't received people that went down and helped with different things that had to be done. I mention this because this seems a small input compared to the many hours that have been spent on this one-of-a-kind historic preservation area for our city. As we come up to our 125th anniversary celebration, we're going to be doing, hopefully, different kinds of things and having different people come into town. I hope we will encourage visitors to tour the museum and enjoy reliving memories of their past experiences. I forgot to bring that book. I have a guest book, kind of, like you go for weddings and you sign in or funerals. Okay, I have 2 completed and a third that started that I keep down there. So when people come in to visit, they can sign in when they were there and what, if they want to make a comment or something. So there are people coming and going that probably people One couple said they just stopped by because they thought it was interesting. I think they saw the sign on the highway that said the museum. But anyway, with different events being planned, I hope that we're also going to include this building in having local people and out-of-state people come to visit and go through the museum. It's one of the reasons we worked this week and will continue to do so down there. Newberry Elementary School. Every year I do at least 2, usually 3 field trips. They walk down. The art teacher has them draw pictures. I don't know what they do with all of that. We go through it. We talk about why the desks are so little, and they're very excited. So they come down and they do field trips with that. The Oakview Middle School has also used some of our information for resources for some of their teachers. The high school, which is very close and within walking distance, has also come down at various times and used it as a resource. So, at the bottom of these pages are the plan. We have a professional company. I'm very excited about this. A professional company that has agreed for about $5,000, and that's a up and down figure, and it'll take several days to do it. They're going to document every item downstairs and upstairs that we have collected. Document what it is, where it was found, any dates that we want to have put on it. If it says, my parents' high school diplomas are in there. So if it says high school diploma, dated, what date they graduated, that kind of stuff. So then the city will have, I guess like a thumb drive or something, so that we'll have a record, permanent record. If we have a hurricane this coming weekend and it all gets rained on, we'll know what was there. So that's gonna be a big job. Then there's 3 women that are still living that were teachers in the building. And the same people that are going to do this have agreed to meet with them and do, let them talk about it, then they will edit it and make a little story kind of thing. We want to use that and have that eventually in the building itself, plus the city will get a copy of that. Then we want to interview several local people who attended school there and do the same kind of thing. So that's another several hours that work for them. And you can see there what we estimated the cost will be. We also need 2 more display cases for the upstairs room. One, we found a deal on and went ahead and purchased it. So that'll have to be refunded because we had to buy it while we had it. Number 5, the 5th thing was to purchase 2 televisions to be installed in each room. That'd be downstairs and upstairs, depending on where we go, if what happens up there. Anyway, 2 TVs. And then the young man I was talking to has you know, you go to museums, different places, and you look at the map, and you push a button and it tells you something. We would have the system like that. So the 3 teachers talking, you would be able to watch that and when you wanted to, or I could use it during a field trip. So that's number 5. Number 6, we need some kind of programs to operate these things. And don't ask me any questions because I do not know how this works. But approximately $200 for the programs or whatever it takes. Dallas, you probably can tell us. I don't know. But anyway, we need in the downstairs in the schoolroom. There's some stuff that we did many, many years ago that are just sitting there on big boards on an easel, and it's really not very attractive. So we want to take that stuff down and have it, I would take it over to Renaissance Printing and have, we don't have any in here. Those boards that they go ahead and make the picture on, and they're lightweight and you can hang them. I'd like to do that with several of those things. Get rid of those big boards and be done with that. We need a lot of organization still in the upstairs room up there, and we'll be doing that with volunteers. We are missing a very important filing cabinet. It's disappeared. So I don't know if anybody is in here that goes there, but it's got all the Watermelon Festival memorabilia is gone. We can't find it. Totally gone. So it comes out to about $9,300, well, less $100 there, about $9,200. And if this amount should cover all of our expenses, and the project, when it is completed, would be a museum that we can use, everybody can use, and that we can be proud of. This is, well, kind of, to me, this is kind of the final over the hump. We started and we finally got the grant, we got the building done. You wouldn't imagine, you can't even imagine setting up that room and how hard that was. But we got all of that done. It's a working museum, it's doing fine, and this will be the kind of the finishing touches to all of that. So I appreciate your listening, and I'm asking you to help us out. And this, y'all know Cindy Bass, I'm assuming. She's been working.
Would you like to come talk to us?
We do
speech?
windows.
Okay.
Any questions, I guess?
So, anybody have any questions for Miss Linda? While they're considering if they have, oh, there we go, Commissioner Farnsworth.
Naturally.
Is there any type of security system? You're talking about a missing file cabinet. I just wonder if there's any type of security system down there.
I think that's a really good question, and there is, and I think that I don't know why, the filing cabinet itself was in a closet. I don't
And
think
then
the filing
it
just disappeared, totally, completely, it's gone. So I don't know how somebody picked it up. I don't know what they did with the stuff that was in the cabinet. I don't know where anything is.
There's an alarm on the building, so I think there was a reshuffling that may have occurred, you know, I'm not sure. So we can go on a hunt for it, but,
I mean, but there's a lot of historic stuff there.
Right.
And one of my concerns is that someone would just come in and take something and walk out with it, and there's nothing.
We've been so lucky, we really have, that has not happened. We missed a couple of things, and my filing cabinet, but nothing, none of the artifacts. But buying the two new display cases, they're expensive, they're hard to find. We wanted them to fit the theme, not, but they have to be things that we can lock, that can be locked.
well, to that point, the one thing I would encourage you not to do until we make decisions, expend any more money, because there's a difference between this commission funding something and refunding
Right,
something.
we
So
got that.
Just to be careful, I don't want
Right.
you to haul off and say, oh, we're gonna.
Well,
we're
no,
spending
I've already
$1,000 in the
paid
world.
for
Right.
the guy to do all the, no,
You've-
I'm kidding.
Any Commissioner Coleman?
What,
Got him, did you?
my
Hey,
question
did you see
is,
that look?
my question is the paddle that's still there that whipped Monty every single day?
It is, it's on top of the, yeah, and he's volunteered to reenact that at some point.
The school that happened at has been torn down, but I was in the principal's office a
behind
couple
is
times.
still here.
It still is.
I'm
I was
in,
innocent too, by the way.
I'm in favor of this concept. I think a 125-year anniversary celebration will have an event at the Little Red Schoolhouse. I don't know what that event looks like. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think at some point over the course of that year, we are going to have an event at the Little Red Schoolhouse, rightfully so, when we're celebrating 125 years of Newberry. I think that a project like this could spur us. We have, for about a year and a half, we've talked about wanting to move our building department downstairs, move the museum upstairs, keep the whole upstairs as a more elegant kind of a thing, get all that weight off of the second floor, and get it downstairs. And if we move forward with this, I'd like to push that, because whenever this is all completed, we want it all completed all at one time. We don't want to go in there and decorate and then be reshuffling and moving things around. You know, I think for a project like this, the consideration is how are we going about it? For almost $10,000, I think we would normally have procedures that we would go to. We vet the video company. We know exactly what we're getting. We have a contract with them, all that kind of stuff. So,
Would this come under, or could we work with this under Harb?
I mean, you know, my suggestion is if the commission is in agreement that this is a good concept, that the city of Newberry be the one that actually does it, and we ask Ms. Linda to be the consultant on it and work with us, and we say, okay, this is where we want to go. We want to have a video. We want to have, that way we are the account book. We are making sure we're following our purchasing order requirements and those kinds of things. You know, the other option is the Watermelon Committee is a 501c3. It is a standalone organization. We could hire the Little Red Schoolhouse, right, and say this is what we want, much the same way that we've hired Main Street in the past, and say this is what we want. Here's money, go do it. But I don't think we can, nor should we, set a precedent for just writing a check to an individual resident and saying, go do it, right? So I think, you know, you guys were fairly specific with what you wanted. In the Main Street model, y'all were very clear. This is what we want. These are the deliverables. This is what we want to see you guys bring back to us. And staff may have a third option. Those are my sort of two preliminary. If we want to make a documentary, we want to capture these people on film. You know, we want to digitize everything in it, and we want to remodel, because if you've walked through the Little Red Schoolhouse, there are things that are kind of oddly placed there. And what I'm hearing is that anytime anyone in town has something that's old, they just drop it off at the Little Red Schoolhouse. So you have things that aren't necessarily in keeping with education or agriculture.
I'm really tired of that. I go up there and somebody brought me an army uniform. I mean,
Yeah.
and it has no names, no, they just bring stuff. It's just like, oh, well, we're cleaning out the closet, so here, we don't want to throw this away. It's for
Right.
whatever reason, so we'll bring it and drop it there. So that's been more of a problem than people taking stuff out of
Right.
the museum.
But I know where we can get a modular building for $8,000 if we want to build another museum for all that other stuff. It could just be random
There you
old
go.
Newberry
But you're right,
artifacts.
we do want to, that upstairs, what we're calling the downstairs is the, you know, with all the desks and everything right now, we'll just leave it as that. But that upstairs room, which is a conference room, there's two things happening in there. Are we gonna do, are we looking at the agricultural district here or do we want, and this is just thoughts that we're having, process. Are we gonna do like old downtown Newberry?
I mean, I
What's
think
our
that-
focus
I
gonna be?
think that question speaks to why we need a sort of a committee here. We need some folks to make this decision, and so that when we're done and another resident comes in and says, how did that happen? It's not, you know, we had a process that we adhered to. We had something and we say, okay, these are the group of people that worked on it. Did we used to have a group that were Friends of the Little Red Schoolhouse, the kind of a thing?
It was the Watermelon Festival
It
Committee.
was the Watermelon
Yeah,
Festival.
and when I was in charge of it, when we went up into Tallahassee to get the grant, two of the things that we presented to the committee when we were applying for that grant was that the museum downstairs for the Little Red Schoolhouse itself would be in that bottom room. And they had questions as far as whether the original part on the back side of the Little Red Schoolhouse was original to the building or not. And they were kind of iffy about granting the grant because of that. And I had found some pictures in my aunt's house in Gainesville that were made in 1922, and it showed the Little Red Schoolhouse intact with everything that they were looking at, questioning whether it was original. So based on that, they approved the grant, and that's how we got the grant. But when we approached them about the grant, the Little Red Schoolhouse downstairs was supposed to be maintained as a museum, the classroom. And then the other thing that we approached them with was that the room upstairs, which is the conference room now, would be utilized for the community. That people could have meetings in there, that, you know, groups could meet in there, not be charged, that it would be a community center for that. Plus, then we would put the Watermelon Festival, because that was part of the grant also. Then the Watermelon Festival stuff would be upstairs, and it would be utilized that way. So that's, but anyway, and the other thing I was going to mention, there are two things that are missing that after the 100th anniversary, I was in charge of that, and we did a video at the municipal building of all the, I call them our original people, but Miss Mentally and my mom and the teachers at the Little Red Schoolhouse, and we did a video, and the city asked me for it. I did it. They asked me for the video so that they could make copies of it, and I've never gotten it back. So you know, if y'all are gonna do an expansion or you're gonna start doing something with this city stuff, look for that video. And the other thing is the pictures that we put in with the grant that I took up there, they've never come back. And so that's two things I'd really ask the city to look for. But that was the original intent of the grant for the Little Red Schoolhouse.
Okay. So, I mean, I've thrown out two ideas about how, if the commission wants to move forward with this project, how you might go about it in a transparent manner, because we've got to make sure whatever we do, we can trace and we can track.
I think, for me personally, thinking I would prefer, and I'm sure the Watermelon Festival Committee could handle this, you know, they have a good bookkeeper and everything, but I really feel like I would feel more comfortable dealing with the city and doing invoices and taking them in and then directly paying the people that have done the work.
Does staff have an idea about it? I mean, I guess we should have a conversation about whether we want to, before we figure out that part, we need to have a conversation about, is this something that we want to, do we want to consider the whole thing? Do we want to consider parts of it? Where are we at before we get into the weeds of how we go about it? Let's make sure we have, Commissioner Coleman?
Wholeheartedly. We need to, and the whole thing too. We need to do this.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
I mean, I agree. We need to have a way to preserve our history and even for the future. And I think this is a step in the right direction.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in full support of this. The only thing I'd point out is Miss Linda's math might be a little
She's a math teacher.
different from what I added up on the page.
What did you add up?
I came up with $8,000 based on her bolded numbers, and I confirmed that with Commissioner Coleman.
Okay. Yeah. Commissioner Norfleet, you have anything different to say to?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with it, but after the grant with the Watermelon Festival got, was there any agreements with the city of Newberry on how that building was gonna be occupied and the museum maintained along and along?
You know, there's some considerable history to that question. Commissioner Fort was always fairly upset that there was ever any city offices in the Little Red Schoolhouse, because he said that was not the intent. And the only counter argument that I have to that is not about the original agreement, but if we don't have offices in there, then we have to pay somebody to sit there. So it always made sense to me that we have some sort of city office that's doing their daily business in there, because otherwise it's either locked and it's not a very usable museum at that point, or you have to pay someone to sit there and be the museum curator. And I never got a read from anybody on this dais that they're willing to pay somebody to be a museum curator. But that's, in actuality, really what the Little Red Schoolhouse probably needs, right? Because now you'd have somebody that would say, no, I'm sorry, that Army uniform is great, that's historic, but it's not appropriate to here. That person would make sure nothing walks off. Their job would be, but I'm also not sensing necessarily that that's something we want to go down, because now we need to go back to the modular building for real and get the whole building department and permanent department, and we need to increase our personnel because we have to hire somebody to be the tour guide and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I was not part of the original agreement. I have no reason to disagree with anybody that the original agreement was the whole thing was going to be a museum and nothing but a museum for forever and anon. But I've never understood if you're going to take everybody out of there, I've never understood what the alternative is going to be. Is that a long-winded answer to your question?
I was just wondering what was the original agreement?
I think that was it. It was going to be a museum. Commissioner, our manager.
Let me say one more thing. When we went up to get the grant, it was explained to us by the grant committee, or it was a historical grant. And they told us there in Tallahassee that it had to be a historical building, that there could be no city offices or anything in there. That's what we were told that day. But then when the city, Jim Sewell, headed that up, when the city decided to do the work themselves, I don't know if things got changed then. So, and I don't know about that. Jim would have to answer.
Well, either we violated the agreement 30 years ago, and that would be all different staff and commissioners, or there was an updated agreement, because clearly we've had staff in there from almost as soon as it was completed. But I know it was a source of contention with Commissioner Ford. Every time it come up, she was upset about it.
Where Marcia's office is, that little room there, that was sort of in the plan to begin with, and was agreed as a place because that would give somebody there all day, every day. That was the beginning of the, but you're right. I mean, I certainly don't have an answer, and I'm not volunteering to go sit for hours every day, no matter, there is no money. I'm not going to do it. But I don't know what the answer is. But they've been very, the staff that's in the building have been very welcoming to people who have come in, and we appreciate that. So you've got a little problem. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we have universal support of the concept. So now, I guess the question is, because it is getting late, we don't have to work out the details of how this goes tonight. We can put $8,000, because that's what it totals down on our list here, right? $8,000. No, that's right here. Okay. But I do think there are some details here that need to be ironed out with how we go about moving forward here. Are there anybody else from the public that has another consideration that you'd like the commission to take into account?
I have just one other little issue here that could be time factored in. My 3 ladies that are still alive that talked, if I'm going to do something, I'm really feeling a push to get in touch with them, get them up there, give them lunch, and let them talk, because they're,
I understand that urgency. I'm working on a documentary myself, and, people pass. So you need to get, I'm working with
that's my biggest concern there. And
I'm
so,
working with the Samuel Proctor, and they're creating a documentary for free, doing all the recordings and all those kinds of things. So that's what, when I say there's some details to work out, there may be some opportunities. Now, that's not the digitizing all the artifacts and that kind of stuff, but there may be some ways that we can get a professionally done documentary and not have to shell out the whole $5 grand. So that's, but I don't think we need to get into that level of detail tonight. I think we can put $8,000 down, and if we figure out a way to get it done for 7 or 6, you know, great. It rolls into something else, right?
Okay, so, thank you.
But
I appreciate it.
to your
but
point, if we
My
if,
point
if
is,
we do it, it'll be done
can I
this
go
year.
ahead, see, and I keep saying I, but there's other people involved in this, but we're just gonna go with I right now. I need to, I don't know why.
Well, Miss
I'm
Linda,
just really
if you'll
feeling
let us have
nervous
this
about waiting.
conversation, then
Here.
if you let us have this conversation, then you might be able to leave
Okay,
knowing
so we
yay
know
or nay.
where we're going.
Because I think
Okay.
that's where you're trying to get me to say, right? But
Right.
I can't say it, only they can say
When
it.
can I contact people?
If you let us have this conversation, you might be able to contact, now, it won't be adopted until the end of September, September 23rd. So it won't
Okay.
be set in stone, but I gotta open the floor to these guys, because they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, they have 5 things to consider here. Okay, is there anyone else from the public have any considerations that you'd like to add to our list? Or do you want to make any comments? On my list, I have a sinkhole for $50,000, striping on 46 for $36,000, fencing off basins for $22,000, the potential to acquire a police department site for $100,000, a historical preservation project for the Little Red Schoolhouse for $8,000. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Hang on 1 second. Okay, does anyone from the public want to stand up and give the commission their thoughts on any of those before they enter into deliberations? Come on down.
Okay. Listen again. I've mentioned this to you all a number of times, sent you emails, you've had them. We talked about the Newberry Main Street being a line item in our budget. Last year, I remember you said we were gonna put this money in here, it's gonna be a one-time thing. It is currently a line item in our budget this year. Our one-time thing has turned into multiple years. So I'm wondering, why are we putting this back in here again this year?
I mean, I think the short answer to that is it was a continuation budget. So
Okay.
everything got continued forward.
Well, I'm
and-
saying if that's the case, then we ought to back that out.
Well, and to this point, we've had 4 workshops and no commissioner has offered that.
Okay?
Commissioner Coleman?
Well, to that, I did not know that was in there.
You
And
missed the
that-
workshop
I
that
missed
was-
it, I
yeah.
missed it, but I did not know that it was, I thought it was a one-time deal. I'm not, I agree with him. I'm not for it continuing, on that. I mean, we paid them what the work they did, and I'm not for putting money back in there again for it. Not until they come back with something like a presentation that was just happened here, so.
Well, I think, Main Street makes fairly regular presentations to you guys. So the question would be, remember, you paid them to do 3 things, right? So do you want to pull out the funding? Because one of those is continual. 2 of those are kind of done, right? One is the art contest, so that'll be completed at the end of this year, right? The one is the Todds, right? That made it through, so that'll be completed. But the third one is the farmer's market. So if the farmer's market is something you want to continue to hire them to run, you would ostensibly need $3,300 for that project. Commissioner Norfleet?
The whole idea for a farmer's market is for it to pay for itself. They charge their vendors. They're not getting charged from the city for the use of that lot. But, what exact expenses do they have to run the farmer's market?
I would ask you, actually, since you're the liaison, if they've gone through that with you. I know that they were advertising. And I know that they have about 4 or 5 folks out there. It certainly could possibly be that that money was the upfront of getting it kind of off and running, and now that it's, they may not need, they may be willing to do it and say, we think we can make the money off of that. The line that I have taken with Mr. Stainfield is that, and the line that I believe is we don't just write a line item, and it's the same thing I was saying for Ms. Linda. We don't just hand over $10,000 to anybody. We hire organizations in town, like the Newberry Main Street or the Watermelon Festival, and we say, we want you to go do this project. But we don't want to take staff time away to go do it. We want community members to go and do it. So, I think it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask Main Street to come back and make a presentation and say, okay, all of the 3 things that you did for us were all commissioner-generated ideas. I haven't heard the commission generate any other idea for what they want Main Street to do. No one has said, we need to do X, Y, or Z, and we wish we had an organization to do it, except for the farmer's market. I've heard a lot of positive about the farmer's market. I haven't quite heard anybody say they're willing to continue to supplement or support the farmer's market financially, and that's a very distinct difference. So, Commissioner Coleman?
I can't believe it costs money to, I might be wrong, I know they're charging for them to be there $3,300 for, or whatever it is, $3,500, whatever, to have that farmer's market there. We got money in, if it, I do want them to come back here, and, where's this money going? The second thing here is we have enough money in our contingency, right? That if it is, I don't want to use the word legit, but that hey, we need to be spending this money, that we can come back and back this for them. But I agree. I do not want this to continue. They're supposed to be self-sufficient on these kind of things. My perception was that we gave them these things to do, and we're helping boost them, helping them out. But I never thought that we were going to put, here's 10 grand every year, y'all do these things.
Well, and to be fair to staff, in a continuation budget, they plugged in 10,000 because that's what you guys did. It's there probably on the pretext that at some point in the year, you guys are going to come up with something that you want to hire somebody to do. Now, I take the point about the contingency fund would be my point as well. If we don't have anything right now, right, but it's basically a lateral move. You guys programmed in $10,000 last year for 3 projects that you wanted to get done. The proposal in front of you is to program in $8,000 for 1 project that you want to get done. So it's not gonna, if you swap them out, it's not gonna have much of a budgetary implication.
Okay.
And that's, my question when we get to the 8,000, right? If we want to swap that out and say, okay, thank you, Main Street, we appreciate those things. We really like that farmer's market, and we hope we've helped you establish it where it can be self-sufficient. If not, come back and give us a presentation about why it's not and
Right.
what we need to do to help, and we can make that decision then. But we need to still have some sort of structure with the Little Red Schoolhouse preservation project as well, so that we know exactly transparency, we know exactly who's making the decisions, how are the decisions being made, who's writing the check, all those kinds of things. So that
Well, on that, I believe there's 5 people that are on top of this, might be more, and I don't want to weight staff down on somebody having to bring in. I don't know if it needs to be like you had said, maybe the Watermelon Festival folks, Or, I don't know. That would really be a question to
I mean,
Mr. New, but.
The only difference here is that you do have city staff in that building. So I think I like Ms. Linda's idea of working directly with the city because there needs to be a conversation here. It can't be a diktat. This is what we're doing here.
Right.
Because we've got two different departments in that building. So there needs to be a conversation between staff and whoever the committee, I'm calling it Ms. Linda, but whoever it is that's doing this, they need to work together as a team. The staff can't say, no, this is how it's gonna be. They can't say to staff, no, this is how it's gonna be, because we have to share that building. Whatever was meant to be, now we're both there. So we gotta figure out how to play nice and share the space with each other. Commissioner Urson?
Excuse me, couple items. I appreciate Ms. Linda's idea of keeping it in the city, because then we do not have the perception that we are giving groups pots of money to be spending on. The city is providing
money.
that funding, so that, while there may not be a lot of difference, that perception is important. I think from a Main Street standpoint, yeah, that $10,000, we charge them to do those three things, and currently we don't have a financial charge for them to address, and so yeah, continuation budget, staff appropriately just kept it in there. I think we move it to the contingency budget, but right now, without a defined project, there's no reason to have defined money for them.
Well,
We put in the contingency fund, we can do it with what we want, but without a defined project or defined proposal from either Main Street or ourselves, I don't know that we line item that budget for them, per se. We can set aside those dollars in case within 30 days, before the budget's finalized, we do have something that they bring to us or we bring to them and we all agree on. But without a hard proposal, I don't want to necessarily dedicate money to a group. Tonight, we just received a hard proposal for the Little Red Schoolhouse.
and I would say it's right in line with what we asked Main Street to do. I mean, we asked Main Street to do things for the community. This is for the community. You're just sort of, it's budget neutral in terms of.
But it's defined.
Right. Okay, we have, still 4 other things, because I'm assuming we just figured out how to fund the Little Red Schoolhouse project, right? If we take that 10,000 and we shift it over to the Little Red Schoolhouse, and hopefully we'll be 2,000 or 3,000 plus there if we can figure out how to do that as economic as we can. That still leaves us, $200,000 for if you want to do these other 4 considerations, right? $208,000. The sinkhole. I have one other consideration that I want to throw in here. I'm sorry, and I will preface this by saying that I have not had any conversations with anybody about this. So everybody in the room is hearing this for the first time cold. But it does seem to me that this board has encouraged our city staff to go out and continue their education. We want them to do that. We want them to be as professional as they can be and represent the city of Newberry as well as they can. And in every other case when they do that, there is generally some financial consideration for the fact that they've done it. Our clerk has recently attained a brand new level and category of municipal clerk. She works directly for you guys, so you guys would be the body that would show the appreciation for that work in a more tangible way. Certainly on Monday night, we had the opportunity to celebrate Miss Judy and recognize the accomplishment. But if an employee got a degree or got a certificate in something, I think it's probably standard to show that somewhere in the 2 to 2.5% range of an increase. So I'm throwing that out there to you guys because I think that should be included in this consideration.
I would absolutely support that. I support the idea of staff making themselves better, and you know, I would want to think that we are, City of Newberry is an organization that, makes it so attractive for people to be here that they don't want to leave, and rewarding them going above and beyond just standard performance is one way to do that. So certainly when somebody achieves a milestone like that, that's acknowledged internationally, did I get that? Internationally, it warrants that kind of appropriate response.
Other commissioner responses, Commissioner Coleman?
You couldn't have said it any better. I mean, if you go to school and you go and, you get a degree, your pay's gonna go up unless you're at the school board. But
You just had to, is that
I
salt and
know,
wound?
I hate
You just
it,
had to
but-
bring that up? Ouch.
But, I totally agree with Commissioner Hersom on this. You probably right now don't have a hard number of what 2.5% or
I do
3%
not.
would be.
Dallas, can you give us a,
2.5 would be somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 fully loaded, probably closer to $2,000.
I mean, that, between what we just took out for the Main Street, even if the Little Red Schoolhouse comes in at 8, it's still budget
Right,
neutral.
right.
Other Commissioner Norfleet, what I seeing you heading towards the mic? He hit it. Commissioner Farnsworth, you got any thoughts to that? No? So we're gonna put that, and I think at this point in the evening, we're checking the ones that are gonna stay in, right? So I have Little Red Schoolhouse as a check. I have compensation for professional development as a check. Sinkhole, $50,000 for a sinkhole. Now, how much, Dallas, how much do we have over the 1.6 in our reserves? We're at
You have about $150,000.
about $150,000. I mean, you know, the sinkhole and the paint, to me, those are infrastructure items. Those are safety items. Those, I'm not sure we want to take out of reserves. I mean, those seems like they need to be projects that need to be programmed in. But we have 150, we could knock out almost all of these without having to touch the millage, just by, that completely depletes those reserves though. And we certainly have other projects. So do you guys want to look at doing some sort of a mix between those options? You got a third option you want to throw out there between, yeah, Commissioner Norfleet?
You know, I would be in favor of just putting the paint and not going with the thermoplastic paint. Fix the sinkhole, because that is the core functions of the city. One other line item that's on this budget is the economic development, $175,000, somewhere along in there. Are we getting benefits out of that we could apply towards that road work and keeping that millage rate where it needs to be?
Mr. Mayor, just one point on the economic development. $50,000 of that economic development budget this year is the economic development utility development fee waiver program that the city commission adopted.
What's the rest of it?
You'd have to ask Brian. Brian would know. It's a variety of things. Yeah, there's a portion of salaries for the economic development director. There's advertising. There's economic development conferences and trainings and meetings.
So, to Dallas's point, a portion of that, it was a program that the commission recently decided they want to do, so of course you're allowed to reconsider. A portion of it's salaries, for staff people that if we don't fund them there, it's just gonna go up in some other department, say the planning department. Right now, Brian's salary is partially funded out of planning and partially funded out of ED. And then there's probably maybe 50,000 of expenses between advertising and programs that we operate. If you see the presentations that we do when we bring, like Commissioner Freed comes to town, we do those programs, or we had folks in from Thailand Each of those programs may run us, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 to do all that we do when we host those folks, or if our folks travel to some show that has to do with ag tech or any other type of economic development. We funded a couple of consultants. Right now, we currently have a study looking at some downtown redevelopment stuff that'll come before the commission in a few, probably 6 to 8 weeks. You'll see, some renderings. You've seen some renderings we've done in the past of downtown of how Seaboard Coastline Drive might look. I think we gave you 3 alternatives about how that might look. Or the downtown parking lot, we had some funding, things like that come out of ED. It's not big. When we work on logo in the past, or the videos, the ED videos has been funded out of there. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, things that we funded out of there. So I'm not defending necessarily, I'm just trying to educate the commission on how we utilize those funds from year to year.
Mr. Norfleet.
I'm not arguing that those are great ideas and great things, but a lot of times, I think at the city level, we need to get back to the core functions of taking care of our infrastructure, taking care of our roads. Some of that stuff is kind of bells and whistles and looks good, but are we getting the benefits out of it that we're investing in it? I haven't really seen a whole lot of new businesses coming into Newberry over the years. I've seen a lot of residential stuff, but I think y'all pointed out that the residential is not generating a lot of income to the city because of homestead exemption or whatever else is going on. As far as the streets and roads and stuff, looking at what y'all proposed on the however many miles it was, and I think it was right at $4 million to improve all the unpaved streets. Sure. And talking about drainage and stuff on those streets, I watched Gilchrist County. They just did it on county line grade. They don't have no retention areas or anything. Heck, they don't even have a shoulder on the road. It's asphalt, then a fence. So if you run off the road, you're probably hitting a tree or a fence pretty quick. And I know some people that's done that. But I would like to see head in that direction on some of these unpaved roads in the city. And if we are required to have a retention area, maybe we work with the landowners around these roads, and if they're not willing to give some easements for these improvements, then we don't worry about that road. They maintain a dirt road and so forth and so on, and let the homeowners around them, that's part of the deal. If you want to live on a dirt road, you live on a dirt road, but as a city's responsibility, we are responsible for improving and maintaining infrastructure, and the cost of running a motor grader is getting more and more every year. I don't think motor graders are necessarily the best thing to grade a dirt road. I know everybody uses them. I have my disagreements about it. The skill level to run a motor grader properly is probably on the higher end of the equipment operators.
It's an art.
It's an art. And when you have hard rock spots, you go to a soft rock spot, you're going to have problems, and you're never going to make anybody 100% happy driving down a dirt road. I live down a dirt road, and I maintain it, and it sucks. So, and that's just my feeling on it. But that's kind of where I stand with it.
The question of whether or not spending money on economic development is worth it, I think is such a difficult question to answer, because you never know if it's worth it until something happens. I would say that everything that's exciting that's happening in the city of Newberry right now is exciting because of what we're doing on the economic development front. And if one business takes hold, you get one Argos out of the deal, that's $600,000 a year for the life of that business. So it's, this commission 4 years ago decided that they were going to aggressively go after economic development, and staff has worked towards that goal. If this commission wants to change direction, then I think that's an important conversation to have with a full board first and foremost, because that's a big policy decision. If we're talking about tweaking the amount of money, then I think we need to give staff the chance to come back and tell us out of that number what is salaries, what's this program, how much are we actually spending on marketing and advertising and trying to attract these businesses? Because I think that's an important to distinguish. 175,000 sounds like a huge chunk of money, but after we add up the salaries and the programs and all those kinds of things, it's not 175,000 to send Brian to conferences, you know. So I'd like to know what that number is, but you know, that is the commission previous to this one spent a lot of time and money on Parks and Rec, but they wanted to be the epicenter of sports tourism, you know, and they were marching down that road, and they spent a lot of time and money marching down that road. Different commission came in, changed the direction. So, but once you change direction, it takes a while to build that momentum up again, and we had a lull. And right now, we've got a pretty good, I mean, you know, the people that contacted us to come and have the hemp, what's the name of that, right, hemp? Industrial. They reached out to us. They reached out to us because of Newberry is on everyone's mind. Newberry is on everyone's tongue. When I go around to these places, they say, man, Newberry has got it going on. What are y'all doing over there? And I think what we're doing is in that line item. So that's a tough call to make. If you ask me to say, well, point to where we've got from that, I don't know that I can point to something specific. But if you ask me, do I think that it's going to eventually pay back, I would say absolutely, because it only really takes one of those businesses. So I'd be certainly willing to hear other people's thoughts.
I absolutely appreciate Commissioner Norfleet's statement about we need to address core functions of city government. But I would also say that as much as maybe we don't like to use this term, city government's also a business. The city is in the business of promoting our corporate interests as a community, and so one of those ways is through economic development. And I think if we strangle that, it's kind of like pulling your advertising budget when you are a business. How does anybody find out about your product? How do you sell cattle if you don't advertise? And so to me, that while it maybe isn't a core or a historical core function in a modern city, a modern town, economic development and promoting our brand is probably one of those things that we need to not put on the back burner, because otherwise we fall by the wayside and we become the cities and towns that we say, look at them and why are they doing that? We become Waldo, we become Hawthorne, because they aren't pushing the envelope on how to drive the economic basis of their community.
Okay. Commissioner Farnsworth?
I agree with both you guys, actually, but to Commissioner Norfleet's point, I don't think he's against it.
I didn't hear that either. Yeah.
I think that he's wanting a clarification of where the money's actually going to, so that we can know that's being spent appropriately and actually doing what we're wanting it to do. That's what I'm hearing from him.
And what I'm thinking, guys, is it's 9 o'clock and we're still talking and we're down a commissioner. So I think that previous question about whether we need another workshop, for me, is an affirmative. And what I would say, instead of us trying to figure out all of these things here after 3 hours, that we ask these guys to do what we're paying them to do. Let's set up another workshop. We say, these are the considerations that we want. We want more detail about that economic development money, and we want you to bring us some options for how do we achieve these considerations. Give us 2 or 3 different ways to go about doing it. How is that sounding? Because if we keep going, I think we'll be here for quite some time, and we still will need that 4th workshop.
Well,
Commissioner Coleman?
Probably just, they'll take 320, the economic development, break it out line item by line item, so we can all look at it and see if there's something that might need to be cut or not. You know, also, I'm like Commissioner Farnsworth. I agree with both of them. We've had a without spending a pile of money, we've sent infrastructure out east. We've, we've, pretty much got everything together I mean, we're just sitting there waiting with the ag park. And all of that is through economic development, what we've done. And then, but on the other hand, we might need to, you know, it's $180,000 and just see, you know, if there is something that needs to be. I have full faith in staff and everything, and if it's where it needs to be, then it's where it needs to be. But, you know, we need to just look at it.
You know, and I know it's getting late, guys, but my concern is, you know, I'll cheerlead anything this city wants to do. So when we were going down Sports Tourism Road, I was out there saying, we're gonna make this thing happen. But I wholly and passionately believe in where we are right now. The very first thing I said when I set out to run was I want to find a way to keep the small town atmosphere. I want to hold on to our agricultural heritage, and I want to grow all at the same time. And right now, with the Ag Tech Park and Canterbury and bringing 4-H and FFA to Newberry, I believe we have found a niche of how to accomplish that. Because otherwise, you're like every other town, you're just sitting back waiting, and whatever comes, comes. And however it grows, it grows. Because it's going to grow. It's going to grow. Right now, we have found a way, right there at the edge of making it grow our way, to hold on to that past. So that's not an argument that we need to have a certain amount of money in there, but it's an argument against another commission getting elected up here and taking us in a different direction. Because I lived through that process, right? Commissioner Norfleet and then Commissioner Coleman.
Just to kind of clarify where I was going with that, recently just went and did a tour at Cecil Field up there in Jacksonville. Jack's USA was part of that, and that's the area Chamber of Commerce up there. I think we could accomplish similar goals of what we're doing now, and maybe even accomplish more goals by working more closely with our chambers. The city of Jonesville, Newberry-Jonesville Chamber, and the Gainesville Area Chamber of Commerce. And they're getting some state funds and some other funds coming in there to them to help promote stuff like that. And that's kind of where I was going with that, and save it on the city side.
I think there's 3 out of the 5 or 6 that's imperative. The 46th Avenue project, just for safety reasons, and then the Little Red Schoolhouse and the clerk are my 3 right now. And then, I know staff's gonna probably try to talk to Mr. Wiesman, which I don't know if that'll go anywhere at all, but that would be a big help if he could be in there. So, right now, my 3 are the 2, well, it's actually 4, the sinkhole, the striping, standard striping, not the Little Red Schoolhouse, and the city clerk increase right now. But we gotta have another meeting. This is
I think at some point we got to call Uncle for the night.
right.
So what I would like to direct staff to do is let's schedule another meeting. I want 2 items on that agenda. One, a breakdown of the economic development, salaries, how much, you know, those kinds of things. What's in there? Where's it going to? Some kind of conversation about, you know, staff's perspective of the tangible return on that investment, and then some different options for how we pay for all of these things. And that way, if the board says Nix is one, then the question becomes easier. Right, so you program how to pay for all of them and give us 3 different formats, however many you can come up with in a reasonable time frame. If we say no, we're going to take that one out, then the world just becomes simpler. Is that? I'm not trying to stop the conversation for tonight, but it has been 3 hours. And we are down a commissioner. And now we're talking about envisioning and moving into the future kind of stuff. So I want to give Commissioner Martin a chance to be here for that conversation. All right, let's have one more opportunity for public comment before we adjourn for the night. No public comments? Ms. Manager?
Do we want to discuss dates for the next workshop?
Well, we got to fit it into the charter review workshop, the regular commission meetings, the hurricane.
Well, we have a preliminary,
We had one scheduled, right? That we had it down.
Mr. Mayor, I guess we have a kind of a hard stop on the September the 9th. We're going to adopt a preliminary budget and a preliminary millage rate. Once that's adopted, we can't increase it. So we would be safe if we adopted at the 6.36, even though we know we may never adopt that on the final hearing on the 23rd. Next week is got a couple of things that will make life tight, but I assure you that staff will make necessary adjustments. We have the Labor Day holiday. We have a storm.
Hurricane.
We have a storm that's threatening. We have a finance director that is taking night classes on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and he's missed enough classes already this early in the semester that he can't afford to miss another night. And I'm scheduled to be out of town, but I will cancel my time out of town to make whatever we need. We could workshop early on the 9th. We could come in at 6, have a very tight schedule to go through these things, or we could be, we can do something late next week around Thursday, or we can adopt a higher budget on the 9th, and have the workshop later that week, knowing full well that when we do our final budget, we're not going to do that.
After the 9th, you'd have to have your workshop on, if at all possible, on the 10th, because we have to advertise the budget in the newspaper that Thursday. Again, you can go lower, but it causes other things to happen.
I don't believe we should try to plan anything through the 4th. I think the hurricane, we have to at least acknowledge the potential that all of our city staff are going to be on call, working extra time, overtime, right? Hopefully that doesn't happen. But I don't want to plan on anything and make them focus on that. I mean, how much time does staff need to put together the options and to break out that one line item into a presentation? Because I guess the reasoning for my question is, if you guys can do this, let's say Wednesday, if you can do this tomorrow, you know, storm prep is tomorrow, yeah. So, I mean, I think the best thing to do would be to agree to adopt a higher millage rate the first reading on the 9th and buy ourselves some time.
We could workshop on the 10th, which is the Tuesday following.
What about I mean, that's 9/11, so there's some. No, I was offering a different day, the Wednesday, instead of, I have a golf match. I can find somebody to sub for me as coach that day if I need to, but. Were we in agreement about next week is not a good time to try this, or? What about the 5th, September 5th? It's next Thursday. I think that would, you know, unless it's a really bad storm, that gets us out of the storm prep time. But I mean, staff is going to be a little bit fatigued from cleaning up after the storm.
Or we can start at 5 o'clock.
I mean, we can start at whatever time. I mean, if we start at, I mean, my problem with the 9th is you know, I think some of these are straightforward questions. Some of these are larger conversations. I'd hate to say we're going to start at 6 and we're going to hold a tight schedule, be done at 7, if what we're talking about is potentially a serious change in visioning and direction.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I don't think there's a change of direction at all. I think, and this is my perception, Mr. Norfleet, couldn't help but just need to look to see if there is. And if there's not, it'll be cut and dry.
What if we start at 5 on the ninth? Give ourselves,
That's what I'm thinking.
give ourselves 2 hours, and maybe we're done in an hour, and we take a 30-minute break and we come back. Maybe we could, I hate to, we could split the baby 5:30, but it seems to me,
I can make 5 work, and I'd rather fit it all in one night.
Me
than
too.
have another night meeting.
then do another one. 5 o'clock? 5 o'clock, Commissioner Farnsworth? 5 o'clock on the ninth, gives us 2 hours, wrap up our budget workshop, and then it'll all be fresh in our mind as we go into the commission meeting. Yeah, yeah.
Give me a little bit of time.
Okay. Any other questions, considerations, Mr. Manager? Yeah, all right, then, you bought the, public one more chance at public comment before we adjourn. Hearing none, hearing nothing from the dais, we are adjourned.